Hey guys, tonight we're slipping quietly into an Edwardian home. Well, actually we're barging in at dawn because honestly this place never really sleeps. It's around 1908, give or take, and you've just opened your eyes to the faint sounds of footsteps in the hallway, the soft creak of wood, and maybe a muffled clink of silver on china. Don't bother reaching for your alarm clock, there isn't one. You don't need one. Someone else has already decided it's time for you to wake up. You're in a nice house, like really nice. A proper townhouse if you're in London, or a country estate if your family prefers open land and a convenient distance from the lower classes. But whether it's red brick or grey stone, your ceilings are tall, your fireplace is decorative, and your sheets are crisp linen. You've probably got a lace-edge pillowcase and at least 2 layers of bedding that someone else straightened before you even got in. And now comes the morning ritual, a gentle knock at the door, and in glides your lady's maid, or valet if you're a man, carrying a tray with tea, toast, and the day's post, which has already been sorted downstairs. She or he draws the curtains just wide enough to let in the light, but not enough to blind you. It's soft, it's polite, and it's your first reminder of something very Edwardian. Everything is done for you, but also nothing really belongs to you, not even your solitude. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'm curious, what city are you listening from tonight? What time is it where you are? Let me know in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit up slowly, the room's still cold around the edges, because central heating isn't really a thing yet, and you can see your breath if it's winter. A fire might be burning faintly in the hearth, thanks to a maid who got up hours before you. Your feet slip into warm slippers, again thoughtfully placed, and you take that first sip of weak breakfast tea. It tastes slightly metallic. Not bad, just British. Here's the thing about this moment. It's peaceful, but orchestrated. That knock on the door, that was scheduled. That tea, brewed in a scullery with water carried up 2 flights of stairs. Even the mail. Someone sorted it by hand at a desk near the servants' entrance, double-checking the right cards for the right tray. Everything appears effortless, because dozens of people below stairs are making sure it does. By the time you rise and pull on a dressing gown, silk if you're feeling fancy, wool if you're realistic, the household is already in full motion. Bells wired to every major room ring downstairs whenever someone upstairs calls. Each servant knows which bell is whose by the tiny label beside it. Drawing room, morning room, nursery, ladies' bedroom, master's study. The servants' hallway below stairs looks like a telegraph office of domestic need, and it's been clanging since just after 5. You pad down the hallway to wash up, not in a bathroom, not really. You use a ceramic basin and jug placed on a marble-topped washstand. The water is lukewarm at best, because it was heated in the kitchen and carried up in a kettle. If you're lucky, someone remembered to put your toothbrush out. Yes, those were a thing, and your hairbrush is laid out like a little crown. So let's zoom out for a second. You're in a family that's not quite royalty, not quite celebrity, but very much in that sweet spot of inherited money and carefully preserved status. You might be the daughter of a wealthy industrialist or the third son of a minor aristocrat. Titles are still currency, but new money has made its way into the neighbourhood too, especially now that trains have made country estates just a day trip from the smoky chaos of London. And yet, no matter where your family's money came from, coal, textiles, railroads, shipping, it all filters into one morning like this. The Edwardian ideal of family life was based on the illusion of serenity. But that serenity, it's built on rules. You're supposed to look composed before 8 AM, speak softly, avoid appearing excessive, and always maintain your dignity. No one talks about the servants except when something goes wrong. No one shows up to breakfast in a rush. And definitely, no one goes downstairs unless you want to start a social earthquake. Even the furniture supports the illusion. You've got a fainting couch in your bedroom because heaven forbid you exert yourself and then just, I don't know, sit. There are bell pulls embroidered with roses, velvet footstools for no reason, and at least one large armoire full of things you rarely wear. The wallpaper has a botanical pattern, possibly imported, and somewhere in the corner, a neglected fern is doing its best to survive on indirect sunlight and polite indifference. Here's a curious little detail. While the house seems static, it's actually a maze of movement. Hidden corridors allow servants to move without being seen. Some families even had tunnels or narrow passageways between floors so staff could access rooms invisibly. And yes, that's a real thing. In more extreme cases, speaking directly to a servant, especially at the wrong time of day, was considered bad form. There's a whole language of hierarchy in who talks to whom, when, and how loudly. By now your tea is cold and your maid is waiting just outside the door, ready to help you dress. She won't knock again unless it's late. You swing your legs off the bed and glance toward the wardrobe. Somewhere between the corset and the collar stays, your next hour is mapped out. But you're not in a hurry. No one hurries in this house unless there's a fire or an unexpected royal visit. One debate among historians is just how much emotional closeness there actually was in families like yours. Letters and journals suggest genuine affection. Some mothers adored their children, and husbands often loved their wives. But many Edwardian parents also viewed their kids as little adults in training, and maintained a strict emotional distance. Morning moments like these weren't usually shared. Everyone had their own rhythm, their own room, and their own servant. Still, there's something elegant about this hour. The light slanting through the lace curtains, the gentle hiss of a kettle being reheated somewhere, the quiet, deliberate choreography of a house waking up one room at a time, and you're at the centre about it. Pampered, scheduled, and just beginning another day in a world that looks peaceful, but hums with invisible labour beneath the surface. Downstairs, the mood is entirely different. If your morning started with delicate footsteps and the soft clink of porcelain, the world below your feet began in a frenzy. You may still be in your dressing gown, sipping cool tea in a well-lit room with fluffed cushions, but directly underneath you, the kitchen scullery is vibrating with noise, steam, and urgency. The servant's day began hours before yours did, well before the first bell rang. Let's say it's 600 a.m. The kitchen range is already blazing, puffing out thick heat into the long stone-floored room. There's the rattle of pots, the scrape of iron against iron, and the rhythmic thump of bread dough being kneaded with tired knuckles. The scullery maid, just 14 and already with permanent red patches on her wrists, has been up since 4. She's cleaned out the ashes from the previous night's fire, hauled fresh coal from the cellar, and begun boiling water for the household's basins. Her hands are raw, her apron damp, and she hasn't yet spoken to anyone except maybe the cat, who is definitely smarter than several humans she works with. Above her in rank, the kitchen maid slices bacon and cracks eggs, keeping one ear tuned for the cook's inevitable critique. And the cook? Oh, she's a force. Not the fancy chef some nouveau riche families have started hiring, but a battle-tested culinary commander who could feed 30 people and never break a sweat. Her word is law in this half of the house. She doesn't take sass from the footman, and she definitely doesn't take suggestions from the mistress of the house, unless they're delivered with polite vagueness and an offering of sherry. You wouldn't know any of this from where you are upstairs, of course. What you see is the end product. The breakfast table arranged with military precision, boiled eggs in silver stands, toast that arrives perfectly warm, and marmalade that appears in its own cut-glass dish with a little silver spoon. But every piece of it is the final step in a backstairs relay race that's been running since well before dawn. Now, zoom out a bit mentally. There are 2 different universes in this house existing in parallel. You float through one, bright, slow and still, and beneath that another pulses with motion, labour and strict routine. It's a class system in architectural form. The front staircase is for family. The back stairs are for servants. They're narrower, steeper, and usually don't even have carpet. That division is intentional. You're not meant to meet halfway. Ideally, the only time you'll see a servant is when they glide in silently, fulfill a task, and vanish like human furniture. Even the rhythm of movement is choreographed to maintain the illusion. Servants are trained to avoid walking too heavily, too quickly, or too close to the family. Some households even uses mirrors or convex corner lenses to detect whether a servant might round a corner too suddenly, and, God forbid, interrupt someone's solitude. In essence, the house breathes in a double time, visible grace above and hidden industry below. One of the quirkiest parts of this upstairs-downstairs duality? The bells. Each room has a call bell wired down to a central board in the servants' corridor, where a brass needle jumps when rung. The bells all sound slightly different. A keen butler or housekeeper could identify the drawing room's trill from the ladies' bedroom's ping with no need to look. It's a weirdly elegant communication system, kind of like Edwardian text messages, except no one can leave you on read. If you're the master or mistress of the house, you almost never descend to the basement level. It's not done. Even entering the kitchen is considered deeply eccentric unless you're American or theatrical, ideally both, The housekeeper might come up to consult about menus or guest arrangements, but even she's part of a system meant to keep you removed from the mechanics of your own comfort. Let's talk about her for a second. The housekeeper is probably one of the most powerful women in the building outside of the mistress herself. She's the central node for linen, lighting, locks, and all domestic strategy. She keeps the keys, literally. The housekeeper's room isn't just for naps and tea. It's the nerve centre of the household, with ledgers recording every delivery, every shilling spent on lamp oil, and every broken chamber pot. If something goes wrong, she knows it before you do. If something goes really wrong, like missing brandy or an unlatched window, you might even hear her raise her voice. Maybe. Then there's the butler. Think of him as the CEO of downstairs operations, but with more white gloves and fewer performance reviews. He manages the male staff, supervises wine storage, and handles the silver, not just cleaning it, but keeping a written inventory so nothing mysteriously walks away. He also serves dinner, greets guests, and is usually the only servant who can speak freely to the master of the house. But even he lives under strict expectations. His tone, posture, even the angle at which he pours port, every detail is judged. He is elegance personified under pressure. Meanwhile, the footmen have their own little drama going on, chosen largely for their height and legs. No, seriously, they're more decorative than useful most of the time. They're the ones who open doors, carry trays, and look nice in livery. Essentially the human equivalent of a very well-trained, expensive-looking Labrador Retriever. But don't underestimate them. They gossip better than anyone, know everyone's secrets, and often have a side hustle going, whether it's slipping extra brandy to a visiting cousin or ferrying messages to the downstairs parlour maid. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about just how invisible servants really were. Some argue that the strict codes of conduct, like not making eye contact unless addressed, created a constant state of dehumanization. Others suggest that servants had considerable informal power, especially those who had been with the family for years. After all, who knows more about the household's moods, finances, and flirtations than the people who change the bedsheets? And of course, all of this hierarchy comes with a unique twist. The servants themselves also have status games. The butler won't speak casually to the kitchen maid. The housemaid looks down on the scullery maid. The cook rolls her eyes at the governess, who doesn't even count as a servant or a lady. There are dozens of unwritten rules about who eats where, when, and in what silence. As the household settles into the thick of morning, you're likely preparing to dress. But down here, they're resetting for lunch. The kitchen smells of meat stock and rising bread. The scullery's full of breakfast dishes, and the boots have just come in from the hall, damp from morning deliveries. Each task flows into the next. There's no pause, no off switch, just another bell waiting to ring. Above it all, you exist in a world of calm surfaces and silent service. But underneath you, there's an entire civilization running on blistered feet, whispered warnings, and tea that's always just slightly too strong. By the time breakfast is actually served, it's already the third or fourth meal of the day, for someone. Not you, of course. You're the last domino to fall in the morning procession. Your breakfast is a calm, orchestrated event that feels like it was conjured by magic, but the truth is far less whimsical and a lot more scrambled eggs. You descend the stairs when the clock strikes a proper time. Any earlier and you'd risk appearing overeager. Any later and you'd face the quiet judgment of the butler, whose raised eyebrow has ended more reputations than the evening papers. The dining room is already prepared, with curtains drawn just enough to let in a wash of grey English light, and a subtle floral arrangement anchoring the table like it was born there. The good silver is out, but not the best silver. That's reserved for dinner. You're seated according to rank. If there are guests, it's a delicate negotiation. If it's just family, the order's been agreed upon and internalised to avoid drama. And then it begins. The Edwardian breakfast. You might think it's a quick affair. Tea and toast? That's just the beginning. There's porridge for those who still nod towards Spartan traditions, eggs, fried, poached or boiled, kidneys if you're feeling brave, bacon so fatty it glistens under the gaslight, kippers for the strong-stomached, and on fancier days, smoked haddock. Cold meats are available if you're suspicious of warm food before noon. The toast rack makes its appearance, an invention as British as imperialism, designed to serve toast exactly how no one likes it, stone cold. And tea, endless tea, weak, black, strong, milky, sugared, or served with a small wedge of lemon if someone's been to the continent. Coffee is offered too, though it's still suspiciously foreign and often badly made. usually a little burnt and delivered reluctantly by a footman who clearly judges you for requesting it. The family takes its places, a slow-motion parade of people acting like they have never fought or cried. Small talk is encouraged, but it's light, purposeful. No politics, no money, and definitely no feelings. The weather, the newspapers, garden plans, and Aunt Millicent's cat are fair game. If someone's read something in the Times that morning, they might offer a quote, and then pretend not to mind when no one reacts. Now here's the odd part. Not everyone eats together. This isn't a democracy. The family may dine in shifts depending on status and age. Children, for example, do not join this meal, unless they are particularly charming or being trotted out for a visiting relative. They're fed upstairs in the nursery, monitored by the nurse or governess, who ensures their toast is cut into manageable fingers and their jam applied in socially appropriate amounts. The servants, of course, have already eaten long ago, seated in the servants' hall, where the cook presides with quiet authority and the footmen sneak extra butter under the table. Their breakfast was porridge, maybe a sausage or two, and bread that didn't quite pass muster for upstairs. They ate fast, too. No time for small talk when the marmalade needs spooning into dishes by the time the mistress appears. One curious detail that tends to get lost in romanticised versions of Edwardian life is how rigidly timed breakfast was. This wasn't just a meal, it was a daily performance. You show up on time, properly dressed, well postured, and you don't make a mess of things. God help you if you slouch. Napkins are placed on laps with the same reverence as communion wafers, and the butter knife is not, under any circumstances, to be confused with the fish knife, even if fish isn't on the table. And let's not forget the staff circulating through the room like silent ghosts. The butler orchestrates the whole thing, signalling to the footman when to bring in the hot dishes or refresh the tea. A dropped spoon or an awkward clatter isn't just an accident. It's a ripple in the social fabric. No one says anything out loud, but judgments are swift and internal. There's a strange intimacy to this routine and also a distance. Everyone is physically together, but emotionally walled off by etiquette, expectations and unspoken rules. You talk, but not really. You look, but only briefly. If you're the daughter, you probably keep your gaze lowered and less addressed. If you're the son, you might be flipping through the paper, already rehearsing the day's small rebellions in your head. And if you're the patriarch, your every comment carries the weight of authority, even if it's just about the jam being too runny. One fun little fringe detail. In wealthier homes, some families installed toast servers, young male staff whose job was literally to keep bringing hot toast, so the lady of the house would never have to suffer the indignity of cold bread. Not every house had them, obviously, but it was a flex. Nothing says we're holding on to the empire like a personal toast boy. Breakfast also offered a subtle chance for negotiation. Visiting relatives might announce plans for a walk or a trip to town, gently floating ideas to see if anyone objects. Servants sometimes received indirect instructions here too, never addressed directly, of course, but embedded in the family's conversation. "I do believe it's time to have the garden path re-gravelled," says father, while looking at no one in particular. The butler hears. The gardener hears. Gravel will appear. There's a scholarly debate about how sincere these meals were. Some argue that the whole thing was performative, a way of maintaining control and appearances. Others point to family letters and diaries that describe genuine affection during meals, with shared jokes and quiet glances that carried years of history. But even affection had rules, unspoken ones. You could love your children but not dote. You could laugh but not cackle. You could enjoy your food but never visibly want it. When the meal ends, it doesn't end like brunch at a cafe. There's no lingering, no stretching out with a third cup of coffee. It concludes on cue. The master stands or the mistress rings a bell. The family disperses. Servants appear to clear the plates and replace the tablecloth. The ritual resets for tomorrow, unchanged. You push back your chair, napkin folded precisely and placed beside the plate. You say something light, perhaps a remark about the roses blooming late this year, or a comment about a cousin who just bought a motor car. Everyone makes the appropriate noise of acknowledgement. Then you walk out, full, but somehow still unsatisfied. And just like that, breakfast ends, not just the meal, but a miniature theatre of class, manners, and the careful maintenance of family illusion. Getting dressed in an Edwardian household is not something you do by yourself, unless you're a child, a servant, or someone who's already fallen from grace. For you, a proper member of the family, dressing is a collaborative event, a small theatrical production that begins with an entirely separate person entering your bedroom bearing fabrics, options, and just the faintest trace of judgment. If you're a woman, your lady's maid has already laid out underclothes, which is ironic since they cover more skin than most modern outerwear. There's the chemise, thin cotton, edged in lace, followed by the corset, which is not the waist-punishing medieval torture device people imagine, but still pretty restrictive. She fastens it carefully while you stand with your arms out like you're being fitted for a suit of armour. You breathe in, exhale slowly, and accept that lung capacity is now a fond memory. Then come the petticoats. At least 2, sometimes more, depending on the weather, your status, and whether you plan to be seen by anyone important. Stockings are rolled delicately up your legs, held in place by garters that sit just above the knee. No elastic, no lycra, just the slow negotiation of cotton and ribbon. Your feet are slipped into boots with pearl buttons that your lady's maid fastens with a tiny hook, because trying to do it yourself would probably end in tears or a sprained wrist. If it's a morning dress, it's likely light wool or cotton, with a high collar and long sleeves, modest but not dull. If you're expected to be visible to callers, she'll suggest something with embroidery or lace cuffs, maybe a brooch. She doesn't ask what you want to wear, she suggests gently but firmly, and you agree. That's the dance. Now, if you're a man, the process is slightly less complicated but no less absurd. Your valet begins by ensuring you've shaved properly. If you haven't, he'll do it himself with a straight razor and the same expression a priest might wear during last rites. Your shirt is starched so stiffly that when you put it on, it practically whistles. Collars are interchangeable, held in place with studs. The wrong collar shape could send the wrong message, and you'd rather not be mistaken for a clerk. Next is the waistcoat, the trousers, and then the cravat or tie. Your valet knots it for you, of course, because heaven forbid you try to manage a Windsor knot with untrained hands. Finally, your coat, brushed free of lint, and your shoes, polished to a mirror finish the night before. Cufflinks, watch chain, pocket handkerchief. It's less getting dressed, and more assembling a uniform of superiority. By now it's close to 10 in the morning, and you've barely done anything except be dressed at. But this is the point. Dressing isn't about function, it's about symbol. Your clothes announce your station. They tell the world you're not a labourer, not a tradesman, not anyone who works with their hands. You're curated, you're expensive, you are above. Here's a fun, slightly bizarre detail. Some Edwardian women wore something called a bust improver, kind of cotton-stuffed pouch to fill out the bodice. Others wore hip pads to balance the silhouette. The idea was to create an S-curve posture, a silhouette that screamed gentility and also mild spinal discomfort. The corset pulled the waist in, the bust improver pushed the chest out, and the petticoats added volume to the rear. Congratulations, you are now a fashionable teapot. There's also a fascinating little side debate among costume historians about whether Edwardian fashion empowered women or imprisoned them. Some argue that the elaborate gowns and high collars were oppressive, keeping women ornamental and inactive. Others say that, paradoxically, the wardrobe gave women power, through appearance, status, and control of social codes. After all, if you knew how to dress and navigate a drawing room, you could wield influence in ways that were both subtle and significant. And yes, the ritual of dressing applied to children too, just in a more miniature, occasionally nightmarish way. Little girls wore starched pinafores, ankle boots, and wide-brimmed hats if they were going outside. Little boys were trussed up in sailor suits or velvet jackets, depending on how recently someone in the family had read Little Lord Fauntleroy. They didn't dress for play, they dressed for presentation. Actual fun was a secondary consideration, but the real distinction, the one you feel in your bones as buttons are fastened for you and skirts are smoothed down, is that you're being dressed to appear. Whether you're going out or staying in, whether you expect callers or not, the clothes make a statement. You are someone with means, someone who doesn't need to labour, someone whose time is too precious to waste on fastening their own boots. Meanwhile, your maid or valet remains standing, waiting for your nod of approval. Not that you'd thank them, not usually. A nod is sufficient. Maybe a soft "that will do." Any more than that, and you'd risk seeming overly familiar. Or worse, American. The intimacy of the moment is strange. They've seen you half-dressed, helped you into garments you couldn't possibly manage alone, and yet the boundaries remain firmly intact. There's no chit-chat. You're not friends, and even if you're tempted to ask a question about their life, where they're from, whether they've got family, you don't. It's not done. They slip out the door before you've even finished adjusting your cuffs. Once you're dressed, you pause, you check the mirror. Not to see if you look good, you already know the silhouette is correct, but to see if anything's out of place, a stray thread, a smudge of powder, a hair out of alignment. You don't fix these things yourself, you ring a bell, let someone else make you complete. And it's worth noting, even if your life feels glamorous, even if you're swanning about in brocade with lace at the cuffs, you're still in a way part of a machine, just a better oiled cog. There's a schedule to follow, a reputation to maintain. You don't dress for pleasure, you dress because the structure of your world demands it. Not because you love the way you look, but because someone else might be watching. So now you're dressed, laced, buttoned, polished, cinched and puffed. You look like you belong in a fashion plate. You feel taller maybe, restrained, aware of your body in a way that's not exactly comfortable. But you look the part. And in this world, that's half the job done. The children of the house are awake now, somewhere upstairs in their own private kingdom, a nursery suite you may never have entered, even if you're their parent. You hear them faintly, if at all, maybe the echo of a high-pitched laugh, or the patter of slippered feet on hardwood floors. But you don't go to them. That's not how it works. In Edwardian family life, children are both central and curiously peripheral. Loved? Yes, but kept firmly at a distance. They are being supervised, wrangled, and civilized by the nurse and the governess, two figures who spend more time with the children than their actual mother does. The nurse manages their health, their meals, their general behaviour. She is firm but adored, as much a fixture of their world as the wallpaper. The governess, meanwhile, oversees their education and moral development, which is another way of saying she's been left with the difficult task of teaching small humans how not to disgrace themselves at dinner. If you're the mother, you might stop by the nursery mid-morning, but only briefly. You won't be dressing the children, bathing them, or preparing their breakfast. That's already been handled. Your visit is symbolic. Perhaps you ask whether your youngest has recovered from a cough or murmur an affectionate word to your eldest about their drawing. You do not stay long. You're not cold, just trained. Emotional formality is the uniform of upper-class parenting. And if you're the father, it's even more removed. A nod across the breakfast table might be the most connection your child gets that day. He or she will probably refer to you in the third person. Papa said, or I mustn't disturb father. You'll become more relevant when they reach school age, when reports and future careers begin to matter. But while they're small, they belong to the nursery. It's not that you don't love them. You do. It's just that in your world, love doesn't look like bedtime stories or muddy games in the garden. It looks like making sure they have the right governess, the right grammar, and eventually the right connections. It's a parental model where it's built on structure and inheritance, not bedtime kisses. Back in the nursery, the daily routine is already underway. Breakfast is served on a child-sized table, with porridge, boiled eggs, and weak tea. The nurse oversees the entire affair, correcting posture, scolding any tendency to eat with fingers, and ensuring that napkins are properly used, even when jam is involved. Discipline is part of every spoonful. If someone spills their milk, the consequences are swift and silent. A disappointed glance, a stiff back, and possibly an extra hour of arithmetic later. After breakfast comes lessons. The governess, always unmarried, educated but underpaid, has set up a small classroom in the schoolroom, perhaps with a globe in the corner, and faded maps of the empire on the walls. The curriculum is rigorous and deeply moral: scripture, Latin, French, spelling, penmanship, geography, and a thorough review of British history, all delivered with an emphasis on manners and obedience. Girls are taught with the assumption that their education will serve them socially, not professionally. They must learn music, painting, and embroidery. They should be able to read French, but not speak it too fluently, lest they seem too worldly. Boys, on the other hand, are trained for a future that might include Eton, Oxford, and then the civil service or the army. They are expected to show grit, control, and just enough charm to survive public school without being eaten alive. Now, here's the interesting and slightly heartbreaking bit. Most of the emotional life of these children happens with staff, not family. It's the nurse who comforts them when they're ill, the governess who knows which one wets the bed or can't bear thunderstorms. Servants often become surrogate parents in every way except formally, and yet those bonds have a ceiling. Children are taught that the staff are not equals. They can be loved, but not confided in too much. A child who becomes too familiar with the help might be gently corrected, or not so gently shipped off to school. There's a fringe fact here that's almost too poetic to be real, but it is. Some children growing up in aristocratic homes had to write formal notes to their parents to request a meeting. Not all families did this, of course, but it wasn't unheard of. You might send a written message to your mother asking if you could visit her drawing room after tea, and she'd reply, "Yes, you may come for 15 minutes. It was love through the filter of hierarchy. As the morning wears on, the children might be taken out for a walk, not alone, obviously. The nurse leads the way, sometimes with a pram, sometimes with the smallest ones holding her gloved hand. The older children trail behind in little boots and coats that itch. Parks are common destinations, or perhaps a circuit of the estate if you're living in the country. They're not encouraged to shout, run, or climb. This is exercise, not fun. Mud is frowned upon, joy is tightly managed. Inside, when weather doesn't cooperate, and let's be honest, this is England, so that's often, the nursery turns into a strange combination of classroom, prison, and playhouse. Toys are present, but controlled. Dolls with wax faces, a rocking horse, maybe a Noah's Ark filled with carved wooden animals. If they're lucky, there's a set of tin soldiers or a magic lantern. But noise is discouraged. So is laughter that lingers too long. And heaven help the child who misbehaves. The punishments are gentle by Victorian standards. No caning. At least not by the nurse. But discipline is constant. A cold stare, a delayed meal, a cancelled walk. More subtle than violence, but just as effective. The goal is to create well-behaved adults as quickly as possible. Childhood is viewed as a training ground, not a time of joy. Scholars argue about how emotionally damaging this system really was. Some children grew up fondly recalling their nurses and governesses. They loved their parents from afar, through letters, gifts, and rare Sunday outings. Others, though, described a kind of emotional vacuum, a sense of being shaped rather than raised, of becoming what was expected without ever being asked what they felt. So as you head into your morning, perhaps preparing to call on a neighbour, perhaps planning your embroidery or reviewing the household accounts, your children are already deep into a separate world, one filled with quiet rules, gentle supervision, and the steady, unspoken pressure to become something respectable. They might glimpse you later, walking through the hall in your velvet gown or tailored coat, nodding faintly in their direction. They'll stand up straight as they've been taught, and offer a polite, "Good morning, Mama," or "Good morning, Papa." You'll nod back, maybe smile, maybe not, and then you'll continue on your way. You've made it through breakfast, your clothes are properly buttoned, and your children are safely off in their tidy, supervised orbit. Now, it's time to play the role of the master of the house, or at least look convincingly like one. And let's be honest, it's less command centre and more respectable loafing. Your routine is part business, part ritual, and entirely about preserving an image of control, even if you're mostly just wandering between polished rooms sipping mid-morning tea. You begin in the study. It's one of the few truly private spaces available to a man in an Edwardian home. There's dark panelling, heavy drapes, perhaps a bookshelf lined with leather-bound volumes you don't always read but would never admit to ignoring. The fire is already lit. The air smells faintly of pipe tobacco and beeswax polish, and there's probably a globe sitting in the corner for dramatic pauses and moments of reflective pacing. A footman has brought in the morning post. Letters, invitations, perhaps a discreet envelope from your club reminding you to pay last month's wine charges. You sit behind your desk, not really to work, but to appear as though you might. You open each letter slowly. Some are social obligations, some are estate matters, and some are just the usual appeals from relatives who never quite grasp the word no. You consider applying, but not by hand. That's what the secretary is for. Maybe you dictate a few letters, maybe not. You might summon the butler for a quick conversation about the wine cellar or the state of the roof tiles. If it's a country house, you'll inquire about the gamekeeper and whether there are enough pheasants for your guests to shoot next weekend. These are managerial tasks in the loosest sense, a blend of casual authority and polite detachment. But soon enough, the real business of your morning begins, leaving the house. Not to work, unless you're part of the emerging professional class, which is still slightly suspicious to the older money families, but to conduct affairs. This might mean heading to your club if you're in the city, or strolling the grounds if you're in the country. Either way, the point isn't what you're doing, it's that you're seen doing it. If you're in London, you probably keep a membership at one of the gentlemen's clubs clustered around Pall Mall. The Athenaeum if you're intellectual, Whites if you're old school Tory, the Reform Club if you fancy yourself progressive but only mildly. You arrive mid-morning, hang your hat on a peg with your name engraved in brass, and settle into an armchair so deep it could eat a man whole. Newspapers are provided, as is silence. The clink of china, the rustle of pages. No one talks unless absolutely necessary. And even then, only about the things that matter. Politics, sport, gossip cloaked in discretion. At the club, you might take an early sherry, meet a friend for a quiet lunch, or play a desultory game of billiards. No one really knows what anyone else does for a living, and that's how everyone likes it. Work, real work, is a little vulgar. One must be occupied, yes, but not in a way that suggests need. In the countryside, the rhythm is slower. You'll check in with the steward about tenant concerns. One of the cottages needs a new roof, someone hasn't paid rent, the sheep got into the orchard again. You nod solemnly, issue vague instructions, and then headed out for a ride or a walk. Not exercise exactly, just movement. You wear a hat, carry a cane, perhaps pause to inspect the hedgerows or frown at the clouds. Important thoughts are presumed. The wash because they're made of different metals. You must wash silver differently from tin. Crystal gets rinsed in its own pan, egg dishes require scalding water or else the smell sticks forever. There are no dishwashers, there are no gloves. You've learned to wipe grease with cold water first because hot water just seals it in. And let's talk soap. You use a combination of lye, ash, and whatever mystery powder the cook swears by. It burns, it eats your skin, your hands will crack by November and stay raw until May. You learn to scrub quickly, precisely. There's no margin for error. Drop a plate and you'll catch it. Not with your hands, but with a pay deduction. Worse, the cook might scold you in front of the footman. You don't want to give him the satisfaction. The cook, by the way, rules this domain like a queen without a crown. She's clever, sharp, and has zero patience for clumsiness. You admire her. You also fear her. She never raises her voice, but somehow you always feel like she's about to. She directs you with clipped phrases. Peel that, boil this, faster. You don't argue. You wouldn't dare. She's the only thing standing between you and total collapse. By mid-morning, your apron's already soaked. You've peeled 20 potatoes, descaled 6 fish, cleaned a brace of pheasants, and scrubbed out the basin where someone dropped a teacup full of milk and sugar overnight. Now you're hauling the kitchen waste out to the bins, careful not to let the slop splash on your skirts. The bin is alive with flies, and you look the other way, holding your breath like it might help. When deliveries arrive, meat, milk, bread, you're the one who receives them, not officially, of course. The housekeeper signs the ledger, the cook inspects the goods, but you're the one hauling crates and wiping down slabs of marble. The butcher's boy might leer or call you ducky on his way out. You ignore him. You've got bigger problems than unsolicited flirtation, like scrubbing the copper pans until your wrists give out. Let's toss in a fringe fact to make it worse. Some households had a bell specifically for the scullery maid, separate from the main kitchen bell. It signalled only the dirtiest, lowest tier requests, cleaning coal scuttles, emptying slop buckets, or removing a dead rat from under the larder shelves. So yes, if a special bell rings and it's your bell, you already know your day just got significantly worse. Your meals are a blur. Cold porridge for breakfast, maybe a crust with dripping if the cook's in a decent mood. You eat standing up, usually in the scullery or on the back steps. There's no chair for you, no tea break. If you're lucky, someone might slip you a slice of pudding when the family's eaten their fill, but don't count on it. Dessert is a privilege. You get scraps. Socially, you're the ghost of the servants' hall. The housemaids outrank you. The kitchen maids are slightly friendlier, but they're careful to keep that ladder climbing clear. The butler barely acknowledges your existence, and if the footmen joke with you, it's more about amusement than camaraderie. You hear the whispers, you see the glances, you exist on the periphery, tolerated but invisible. And still, somehow, you learn to take pride in small victories. A dish cleaned perfectly, a kitchen pan that gleams like a mirror, a nod, just one, from the cook when you manage something without being told, no applause, no praise, but a nod. And in this world that's a golden trophy. By late afternoon you're still working, always. You've helped prepare luncheon, scrubbed the pots after, laid out ingredients for dinner, and started heating water for the footman's boots. Yes, they want their boots washed too, the things you do for shiny shoes. There's no end to it. Even when the family has gone to bed and the house begins to quiet, you're in the scullery again, cleaning the last spoons and wiping the counters until they pass the cook's inspection. Your eyes sting from the steam, your arms shake from fatigue. You're 17 years old, and you feel like you've aged into an old woman in one season. Historians argue about whether this life was better than the alternatives. If you'd stayed in the village, you might be married to a man with no teeth and 6 kids before 20. At least here you're fed and paid, but the work is relentless, and your dreams, well, they're few and carefully folded. Maybe one day you'll become a kitchen maid. Maybe a cook. Maybe. So when you finally collapse into your little bed in the storeroom, with your hands still smelling faintly of onions and iron polish, you don't dream of luxury. You don't even dream of escape. You dream of a day off. Luncheon sounds casual, doesn't it? Light, airy, maybe even fun. But in an Edwardian household, luncheon is anything but a casual affair. It's scheduled, it's orchestrated, and it's deeply dependent on who's present, what day it is, and how many courses the cook can manage without snapping at the scullery maid. It's not quite the production of dinner, but it's still an event with more forks than you'd expect for a meal that often includes salad. Let's say it's just after 1 o'clock. The drawing room clocks have been chiming daintily for the past few minutes, and somewhere a footman is straightening his waistcoat and preparing to knock discreetly at the morning room door. You, the lady or gentleman of the house, rise from your seat, brush a non-existent speck of lint from your sleeve, and make your way to the dining room, where the table has been laid for what appears to be a small royal banquet. If it's an ordinary family luncheon, no guests, no visiting cousins, no wayward clergymen, it might be just the family members present, in varying states of formality. Still, everyone is dressed. No one appears in anything resembling relaxed attire. Gloves are removed just before sitting down, napkins are unfolded with silent precision. No one shuffles, no one slouches. Now, what's actually on the menu? That depends. If the cook's been given free rein and a little budgetary breathing room, you might start with a consommé or a clear broth, something light and dignified, then perhaps either cold meat, maybe tongue or ham or slices of roast beef from last night's dinner. There might be a salad, not the green leafy kind you'd recognise, but a strange 1900s concoction involving hard-boiled eggs, pickled beets, or even aspic if you're particularly unlucky. Bread is served buttered at the table with the correct knife. And yes, there's always dessert, because Edwardians believed firmly in sweet punctuation, perhaps a sponge pudding or fruit tarts with custard. And the tea, of course the tea. It arrives not in a teapot slapped down on the table, but in a silver service carried by the footman, accompanied by lemon slices on a dish, sugar cubes in a little bowl, and milk served from a tiny jug that probably has a family crest on it. You sip, pinky not extended but definitely implied, and pretend not to notice the maid trembling as she refills the water jug beside your elbow. One of the quirks of Edwardian luncheons is how absurdly quiet they can be. Conversation is allowed, expected even, but it stays light and avoids friction. No religion, no politics, and for heaven's sake, no talk of labour strikes or women's suffrage, unless your intention is to give grandmother indigestion. It's all weather, garden reports, a cousin's recent trip to Switzerland, or what someone read in the Times that morning. Occasionally someone will make a joke, but softly, cautiously, like tossing a pebble into a very still pond. The servants hover like trained falcons. The butler stands by the door, his hands folded behind his back, listening for any cue. The footmen move with the kind of precision usually reserved for ballet or surgery. Plates are cleared silently, replaced with new ones, and woe to the guest who absent-mindedly reaches for the wrong utensil. There's a specific fork for fish, another for salad, and one that seems to exist solely to stress out the lower gentry. And yet, as theatrical as it all seems, this meal serves a quiet but critical function in the daily rhythm of Edwardian life. It reinforces hierarchy, not just between classes, but within the family itself. Children old enough to attend might be allowed to speak only when spoken to. A married daughter visiting with her own family might sit slightly lower on the pecking order than the lady of the house. Even among siblings, subtle dynamics play out. Who pours the wine, who carves the cold beef, who's invited to linger at the table for port, and who's expected to go write thank you notes in the drawing room. Meanwhile, downstairs, the staff's own luncheon is a very different thing. The cook might grab a plate in the scullery, chewing while instructing the kitchen maid on how to bone a chicken for tonight's dinner. The footman might be permitted a few minutes in the servants' hall, where they eat rapidly and without the luxury of silence. The scullery maid? She's still washing the porcelain from the last course. Her meal will be whatever's left when everyone else is finished. A crust, a spoonful of custard scraped from a bowl, maybe half an apple that someone declared too mealy. It's easy to assume that luncheon was an unnecessary formality, a midday parade of unnecessary courses and unnecessary manners. And yet, some historians argue it held real importance, especially for women. It was one of the few social rituals where a woman could host, manage, and direct the tone of a gathering. She chose the guests, arranged the seating, coordinated the menu with the cook. In short, she ran the show even if she did so behind veils of lace and politeness. Of course, not every luncheon was created equal. There's the at-home luncheon, where female guests are invited for food and fashionable chatter. There's the men's luncheon, often followed by port and business talk and the unspoken agreement that nothing important will actually get done. And then there's the dreaded informal luncheon, where people claim they don't want a fuss, which only makes the hostess more anxious because of course a fuss is expected even when it's not. Here's a niche little fact for you. Some very high-end homes had separate luncheon sets of china, distinct from the breakfast or dinner sets. That's how specialised the Edwardian dining culture became. You didn't serve ham on the dinner plates, that would be vulgar. You had special luncheon porcelain with delicate patterns, lighter colours and matching bone-handled cutlery. And if the set was mismatched, scandal. When the final dish is cleared and the napkins are discreetly folded, everyone rises. You don't linger at the table. That's not the point. You rise with a nod, perhaps exchange a final word about the weather, and return to the drawing room, or the garden, if it's sunny, for what looks like rest but is actually just intermission, before the evening's real performance begins. You might think of it as a pause in the day, a calm centre, but beneath the calm is choreography. Nothing is accidental, not the sugar spoon, not the angle of the salad fork, not the choice to serve sponge cake instead of meringue. Every choice is a cue, and you, willingly or not, are playing your part. And tomorrow it all happens again. Same time, same china, same pretense of ease. The hours between luncheon and dinner stretch out like a long, narrow corridor. Quiet, stiffly perfumed and oddly echoing with expectations. It's the afternoon now, and the Edwardian drawing room becomes the heart of the house, even if no one actually does anything in it. You find yourself back here more out of duty than delight. It's where you go to be seen, but only by the right people, and where time moves at a pace that can best be described as sigh per minute. If you're the lady of the house, this is your territory. Not quite a throne room, not quite a lounge. It's full of plush armchairs with curved legs, delicate tea tables set slightly too low, and embroidered cushions that seem to multiply overnight. There are ferns, always ferns, and at least one footstool that serves no real purpose other than to suggest you're someone who doesn't need to stand. You settle yourself in for calls, which means a small parade of women, and occasionally a daring gentleman, may stop by to visit for precisely 15 to 20 minutes, no more. The front hall table is stacked with calling cards like tiny paper passports, each signalling a social connection, a possible alliance, or a neighbourly obligation. The butler presents the card on a silver tray. You scan it, nod, and prepare yourself for polite conversation that must, under no circumstances, touch on anything of real consequence. Topics include the new vicar's unfortunate accent, whether the grocer has been cheating with his scales, and what Lady Halberton wore to the musicale last Thursday. Blue lace completely inappropriate for her age. What you're really doing is maintaining your position on the social chessboard. Every visit, every eyebrow raise, every compliment that somehow sounds like an insult. It's all strategy. Meanwhile, if you're not receiving guests, you might be the one making calls. You change into yet another dress, something just the right degree of formal, with gloves that button at the wrist and a hat with just enough veil to be demure, not dramatic. You're driven to nearby homes, where you repeat the same conversational dance and hope that your presence and your china teacup handling are noted and appreciated. Back home, the drawing room shifts into a kind of liminal space. You might pick up embroidery or a novel, something approved of course, nothing too French or too modern. The ticking of the mantel clock marks the minutes with alarming solemnity. Occasionally you write a few letters, you rearrange the flowers, you flip through Country Life and pretend not to be annoyed that they featured that woman's garden again. If there are unmarried daughters in the house, they hover here too. They sit quietly, pretending to read or stitch, while secretly hoping someone will call, preferably someone with land, a title, and at least tolerable hair. Their every motion is watched, not harshly, but with that constant Edwardian awareness. You are always performing, cross your ankles, mind your posture. Laugh, but not too loudly. Here's where things get oddly theatrical. The afternoon drawing room isn't just social, it's aesthetic. You are the centrepiece of this curated domestic diorama. Your dress matches the upholstery, intentionally or not. Your children are ideally absent, your husband is off doing something important looking, and the room itself is like a well-behaved dog, expensive, tasteful, and slightly too quiet. Let's drop in our fringe fact here. Some Edwardian hostesses were so meticulous about their drawing rooms that they had fresh flowers delivered twice daily, morning and mid-afternoon, just in case the lilies started drooping. The room had to stay photogenic, even if no one was photographing it, which is peak Edwardian logic. The drawing room is also where courtship simmers. If a gentleman caller has been approved after layers of supervision and scrutiny, he might be received here under the cautious eye of a chaperone. He sits on a small chair, not too close. She sips her tea and demurs. They talk about the weather, music, and what books they're supposed to enjoy. And if all goes well, they both go home and immediately write deeply emotional things about each other in diaries they'll later pretend don't exist. The men of the house, if there are around, might drop in briefly, usually to stand stiffly by the fireplace and pretend to enjoy the company of whichever neighbour is currently perched on the sofa. But the drawing room remains a woman's realm. Male presence is tolerated, occasionally even appreciated, but it never quite fits. They fidget, they check the clock, they ask if it's time for a drink yet. It isn't. As for the servants, they move in and out like well-trained ghosts. A maid brings tea and cakes, carefully laid on a low table that no one ever seems to reach easily. The butler occasionally appears to announce a visitor, then vanishes again, always keeping one eye on the social horizon, like a naval officer watching for storms. And what happens if no one visits? Well, then the drawing room becomes a stage without an audience. You still sit. You still perform. You're not allowed to relax fully. That's what the boudoir or the library is for. The drawing room is for public softness, not private comfort. It's for being graceful, not messy. For appearing thoughtful, not being caught in thought. Some historians argue that this period, the afternoon lull, was when women became most introspective. Diaries from the era often include entries written during these hours, reflections on aging, loneliness, the role of marriage, and the slow, creeping sense that life might be passing by, filtered through lace curtains and teacup handles. Others argue the opposite, that these hours were a rare moment of personal space, however structured, and gave women room to breathe and think away from the chaos of family management and social demand. Either way, the quiet is deceptive. It's heavy with implications. You're in the drawing room because it is where you're expected to be. You're doing the things you're supposed to do. But beneath the stillness is a constant evaluation of status, of presentation, of worth. As the clock ticks toward 4 or 5, the drawing room prepares for its next transformation. The shadows lengthen. The light softens. Someone might open a window, just a crack to let in a breeze. Careful not to disturb the arrangement of lace doilies. Tea time looms, more visitors may arrive, or maybe not. You smooth your dress, straighten a cushion, and wait. This is your kingdom. Fragile, embroidered, and absolutely necessary. Even if you're just sitting by the window waiting for nothing in particular, with a book you've read twice and a smile that hasn't quite reached your eyes since noon. At the quiet centre of the household machine stands a man who neither owns the house nor dines at the family table, yet holds more practical power than almost anyone above the stairs. The butler. He's not the main character, not the star of the show, he's the stage manager. The one pulling levers, opening doors, and making sure no one, family or staff, derails the whole operation. You don't see him unless you need him. But everything about the house, from the temperature of the wine to the timing of the front door, moves to his rhythm. Your butler rises before the family does. Not quite as early as the scullery maid. Few people suffer that fate, but early enough that by the time the master of the house creaks open his study door, the butler's already polished the silver, reviewed the wine cellar, and mentally prepared for a day of quiet command. He doesn't scurry. He doesn't sigh. He glides, always upright, always composed. You'll never catch him leaning on a wall or muttering to himself in frustration. That's what the under-butler is for. The butler's domain is everywhere the family treads, but nowhere the family lingers. The dining room, the main hallway, the front door, the cellar, the parlour. He's the steward of space, keeper of timing, guardian of good taste. And his greatest skill? Discretion. The butler sees all. The nervous glances exchanged over the dinner, the empty decanter that wasn't empty yesterday, the letter with the unfamiliar wax seal. But he says nothing. He nods, he notes, he adjusts, silently. Let's take a little stroll through his day, shall we? He starts by reviewing the day's schedule with the housekeeper. The two are equal in status, but operate in parallel worlds. She manages everything inside the walls. He manages everything at the surface, the presentation, the poise, the protocol. Together, they're like a pair of generals co-running a battlefield that smells faintly of rosewater and roast pheasant. He checks the silver next. Not just for shine, though it must shine, but for completeness. Every fork, ladle and candelabra has its place in its logbook. Edwardian households, especially the wealthier ones, kept meticulous silver inventories. Any missing item could imply theft or, even worse, carelessness. And theft was always suspected of the staff. Carelessness, that reflected on him. Then he oversees the footmen. Now, these lads are decorative but potentially disastrous. They're young, often cocky, chosen for height and good legs, and more interested in polishing their boots than their manners. The butler trains them like a conductor trains an orchestra. Where to stand, how to serve, when to speak, preferably never, and what to do if a guest starts talking about trade unions or foreign holidays. They practice serving wine. They practice serving soup. They practice looking effortlessly presentable while thinking quite possibly about rugby. Midday finds the butler supervising luncheon service. He may not carry the dishes himself, that's the footman's job, but he watches everything. He knows where each guest should sit, which dish comes first, and what temperature the Madeira should be served at, and if someone drops a spoon or uses the wrong fork. He doesn't flinch. He just tilts his head 1 degree and the nearest footman adjusts accordingly. No one speaks of it. That's the power of the butler. He doesn't command loudly. He rearranges the universe with a look. And then there's the front door. The butler is its gatekeeper, its oracle. If you ring the bell, he knows whether to let you in, how warmly to greet you, and whether you should be offered tea or just a hard wooden chair near a cold hallway. He knows which guests are to be welcomed and which are to be endured. A second cousin arriving unannounced might find herself stalled in the vestibule while he checks to see if the lady is receiving. She isn't. Not today. Here's a fringe fact you'll love. Some butlers in grand houses actually carried a ruler. Not for show, but to measure the correct distance between silverware settings. If the forks were off by more than a quarter inch, the butler would correct them personally. That's the level of detail we're talking about. Think wedding planner, security guard, sommelier, an etiquette professor, rolled into one tall man with sideburns and perfectly ironed cuffs. Now, despite his composure, the butler isn't invincible. He has his own pressures, mostly from above. The master of the house may be aloof and distracted, but he expects everything to run like clockwork. If a guest's name card is misspelled, or the claret is a few degrees too warm, or the cigars offered after dinner are the wrong brand, guess who hears about it? Not the cook, not the footman, the butler. He absorbs the blame and smooths the surface again, always. And yet, in many ways, the butler holds a strange kind of power. He knows the family's secrets, the real ones. Who's drinking too much, who's been corresponding with a cousin in Paris, who owes money quietly to the tailor. In some households, he's almost a confessor. He's addressed by name, Mr. Giles perhaps, or simply Giles. And while he's never treated as family, he becomes something else, essential. There's some scholarly debate around how much control butlers actually had. Some were near indispensable, managing staff hiring and firing, even handling the family's household accounts. Others were glorified waiters, expected to polish cutlery and keep quiet. But across all interpretations, one thing's clear. The butler is the spine of the Edwardian house. Everything else, family, servants, social drama, hangs from him like vertebrae. Even his living quarters reflect his odd limbo in the household hierarchy. He has a room near the entrance hall, but not too close. It's small but better furnished than the average servant's room, usually with a writing desk and armchair, and a wardrobe that holds at least 2 formal black coats and 3 pristine white shirts. He dines alone or with the housekeeper, depending on the house's size and level of formality, and he never gossips in the servants' hall. That's beneath him. By evening, when the family begins dressing for dinner, the butler shifts into his final and most iconic role, master of the table. He ensures the candles are lit just so that the crystal glimmers, the soup spoons are exactly where they ought to be. He stands at attention as the meal begins and glides around the room like a silent metronome, measuring the evening's tone. And when the last port glass is polished, and the guests have retired to the drawing room, and the candles have burned low, the butler finally retreats to his little room, sits in his armchair, removes his gloves, and, if he's feeling indulgent, sips a small glass of sherry while thinking, just for a moment, I kept the house standing today. Then he sets the glass aside, irons his shirt for tomorrow, and begins preparing to do it all over again. Down the back stairs, just past the warmth of the kitchen, and around the bend where the copper pans hang like a glinting chorus line, the real theatre begins. Not the stiff formal one you see upstairs, with its orchestrated dinners and carefully staged drawing rooms, but the lively, unscripted, chaotic drama of the servant world. This is where Edwardian gossip hums like a hive under the floorboards, and you, be you a maid, a footman, or even the undercook, are cast in a sprawling soap opera that resets every single day. You might imagine the servants as quiet, obedient drones, head down, mouths shut, but you'd be off by a country mile. Down here, among the scullery steam and the linen baskets, the staff are talking, constantly, not loudly. Discretion is still survival, but in corners, whispers, exchanged glances, and casual mutterings over blacking pots and ironing boards. Everyone knows something, and if they don't, they'll pretend they do until they find out. Today, for example, the first footman is awfully quiet. Normally he can't resist commenting on the cook's dumplings or the new kitchen maid's hair ribbon, but now he's sulking. The parlour maid won't look at him, and the other footman keeps snickering behind his hand while rearranging the decanters in the pantry. There's something going on, and you know it'll leak by tea time, probably involving a misdelivered note, a late-night hallway encounter, or some particularly vivid footprints outside the laundry room. The gossip isn't just about flirtations, though there's plenty of that. It covers everything. How much wine was drunk at last night's dinner, which houseguest left their corset hanging from a doorknob, how the young master came home later than he should have with a red-faced friend and a guilty smile. It's part entertainment, part pressure valve. The servants live in silence upstairs, but downstairs, this is their space, and words are currency. What's whispered here can shape lives. If a housemaid is seen leaving a footman's room after hours, her reputation slides in seconds. If the cook is rumoured to be dipping into the kitchen sherry, her authority might weaken bit by bit, until she finds herself replaced by someone younger and less fond of a tipple. Everyone's listening, even when they pretend not to. You, sitting by the stove peeling apples, might look innocent, but your ears are wide open. You file things away, you remember. And it's not just gossip, it's politics. Social dynamics down here are as rigid and fraught as the ones above. The butler and housekeeper are the monarchs, the cook is a warlord. The footmen form their own little club, bonded by livery and vanity. Maids stick together unless they don't. The scullery maid, bless her, is Switzerland, too exhausted to offend anyone, too lowly to be worth targeting. But the rest of the staff, every glance carries meaning. Every seating arrangement at the servants' dinner tells you who's in favour and who's 2 days away from being dismissed. Here's a curious little nugget. Servants often have their own internal mail system. If you wanted to send a note to someone on the top floor without being seen, you might pass it through another maid, or tuck it into a hollow stair rail. Some houses even had tiny servant pass-throughs, narrow panels in walls where messages or items could be exchanged out of sight. Secrecy was part of the infrastructure. And it wasn't just the staff inside the house. The coachmen and grooms, especially in the country, had their own hierarchy in the stables and carriage house. Gardeners had their own turf, literally. They barely mixed with the indoor staff, but still managed to share rumours through the laundry girls or delivery boys. Information flowed like smoke, seeping through floorboards and under doors. No one could stop it. Despite this swirling current of whispers, the staff still found space for real friendships. And real rivalries. The housemaid who shared her bread pudding with you might also be the one who borrowed your bonnet without asking. The under-butler who covered for your mistake last week might ask you to take the blame for something much worse this week. Everything was give and take, an unspoken economy of favours, secrets and subtle power plays. Now let's stir in our scholarly debate for the day. Were servant relationships truly exploitative, or did they contain elements of mutual dependency and personal agency? Some historians argue that servants, though bound by class, found genuine community among one another, a surrogate family of sorts. Others claim the constant threat of dismissal, paired with harsh discipline and paltry wages, poisoned every relationship with anxiety. The truth probably lies in between. Affection and ambition coexisted, loyalty and resentment tangled like bedsheets in the laundry room. The dining table in the servants' hall is where the daily drama culminates. Meals are served according to rank. The butler sits at the head. The cook and housekeeper flank him, followed by senior maids and footmen down to the lowliest, who might eat in the scullery or not at all if they're on bad terms with the cook. Conversation happens, but cautiously. No one wants to offend the wrong person. There's always a little test in the air. Who sits where? Who speaks first? Who doesn't show up? But once the meal is done and the plates are cleared, the mood lightens. Someone might pull out a deck of cards. The younger servants might gather in a corner to swap stories or songs. There might even be laughter, brief, glorious, and immediately stifled if footsteps are heard from above. What's astonishing is how, in this tense and layered world, servants still find ways to express themselves. Some write poetry in the margins of supply ledgers. Others sketch portraits in soot on cellar walls. Letters are composed by candlelight, often never sent. Lives are planned and hoped for, marriages imagined, small businesses dreamed up, the idea of leaving one day, of escaping this soft prison with its good china and impossible demands. So while the upstairs world lounges in tea and lilies, downstairs pulses with life, messy, sharp-edged, and profoundly human. And you, caught somewhere in the middle of it all, holding a mop in one hand and a dozen secrets in the other, know better than anyone. No household runs without its whispers, and you're right in the centre of them. Upstairs, the children are adorable, angelic and usually quiet. Seem just enough to be charming, but never enough to be inconvenient. Downstairs, or rather in the nursery tucked into the uppermost reaches of the house, they're a full-time job. And no, not a job for the mother or father of the household. That would be unthinkable. It's the governess and the nurse who wrangle the Edwardian child into shape with a daily routine that's equal parts schoolroom, military drill, and social grooming boot camp. The Edwardian family may value its offspring, but it certainly doesn't trust them to raise themselves. Children are born into roles before they ever take their first steps. Sons are little heirs in training. Daughters are junior ladies, destined for polite marriages and faintly exhausting charitable causes. The point of childhood isn't joy or self-discovery, it's preparation, and every hour of the day is carved out for that very purpose. The governess is at the helm of this operation. She's not quite a servant, she eats separately, has her own room, and doesn't scrub anything, but she's certainly not part of the family. She's something in between, which makes her position both powerful and lonely. She's expected to be clever, graceful, moral, and invisible. A walking textbook with good posture. Her job is to educate the children, mainly the girls, although younger boys are her territory, until they're packed off to prep school. Lessons begin promptly after breakfast. The nursery table is transformed into a classroom. Slates are cleaned, pencils sharpened, the globe placed on a stool like it's about to be interrogated. The governess begins with reading and writing, moves through geography, moral philosophy and arithmetic, and ends with a bit of French, though always the kind of French that's safe to know, not the scandalous Parisian sort. Discipline is firm but not loud. No raised voices, just measured disapproval. A pointed look when a child's mind wanders, a sharpened tone when an answer is sloppy. You, the child, must sit up straight, speak clearly, and never forget to say please when correcting a sentence or handing over a composition. You're not encouraged to be brilliant. You're encouraged to be correct. Punishments are subtle, cerebral. A missed walk, an extra grammar exercise, a quiet 10-minute stand in the corner with a copy of Pilgrim's Progress in hand. It's not that Edwardians hated children. They simply believed in moulding them into useful, dignified humans before they were allowed to experience anything resembling freedom. Now, let's bring in the nurse. Equal in influence, but different in energy. She handles the other side of child life. The meals, the baths, the scraped knees and late-night coughs. She has the warm hands, the sharp eyes, the uncanny ability to know when someone is lying about eating their greens. And yet even she maintains a certain professional distance. Affection is given, but only within proper bounds. Children may love their nurse fiercely, but they are never allowed to forget that she too can be replaced. The nursery itself is its own small universe. Often located on the top floor, far from the adult quarters, it includes a schoolroom, a playroom, a washroom, and a bedroom with narrow iron-framed beds tucked against pale wallpaper. There are toys, yes, but not many. You've got a doll's house, a few books with upright moral lessons, Little Lord Fauntleroy is a staple, maybe some lead soldiers for boys and embroidery kits for girls. Play is educational, or at least behaviourally reinforcing. Everything exists to build the ideal adult. Here's a lovely bit of fringe history. Some children were taught to curtsy or bow before entering the drawing room, even if no one was inside. It was part of training the body to obey social rules without question. The idea wasn't just to behave properly in public, it was to build that posture into the muscles, so manners became instinct. You didn't think about them, you were them. After morning lessons, there's a short break. If the weather permits, children are taken for a walk, always accompanied, often in matching coats, gloves and hats. They walk in pairs, with the oldest leading, like ducklings in formation. Running, shouting or getting muddy are technically allowed but discouraged. These walks are meant for fresh air and observation, not mischief. Climbing trees might be acceptable for boys, just barely. Girls, absolutely not. You watch the butterflies. You do not chase them. Back inside, it's time for luncheon in the nursery. This meal is simple: bread, soup, a little meat if available, and eaten with better manners than most adults can manage. The children sit at a small table. The nurse watches. Napkins are placed carefully in laps. No elbows, no licking spoons, and if you spill something, prepare to be spoken to in that quiet, dangerous tone that implies deep personal disappointment. The afternoon might involve more lessons or supervised creative time. Drawing, stitching, music practice. Girls learn the piano and the harp. Boys might fumble through violin or recite speeches from Julius Caesar while trying not to roll their eyes. There's no freedom of expression. You're not trying to discover your style. You're trying to display diligence. And then, of course, there's posture practice. Yes, really. Some governesses had children walk with books on their heads or hold their arms out at angles while reading aloud. Posture wasn't just about health, it was about status. A straight spine meant self-control, a slouch meant moral failure. All of this culminates in what might be the most Edwardian ritual of them all, the parental inspection. At some point during the week, sometimes daily, sometimes just on Sundays, the children are brought downstairs, polished and brushed, to be presented to their parents. It lasts all of 10 minutes. The father might nod approvingly, ask a question about Latin conjugation, or inquire about spelling results. The mother might say, "My, haven't you grown?" before glancing at the flowers. Then the children are whisked away again, back to the quiet supervision of the nursery staff. There's some historical argument over how damaging this distance was. Diaries from the era show that many children adored their nurses and governesses more than their actual parents, which makes sense when you consider who bandaged their knees and tucked them into bed. But some adult children later described a kind of aching disconnect from their families, a lifelong attempt to earn approval that never came, sealed with perfectly written letters and emotionally empty compliments. And yet not all was bleak. In some homes, the nursery was a place of joy, especially among siblings. There were secret games under the schoolroom table, whispered jokes about the governess's fondness for barley sugar, elaborate doll dramas, and battles waged with toy soldiers across nursery rugs. The boundaries were strict, but children still found their own soft rebellions. So if you're an Edwardian child, your days are measured, your behaviour scrutinised, your progress logged in neat handwriting. You're watched constantly, praised sparingly, corrected always. You're being sculpted into a gentleman, a lady, a future mother or barrister or duchess. There is no room for mess, for tantrums, or for daydreams beyond what's sanctioned. But if you sit very quietly, very still, sometimes you can hear the piano downstairs. Sometimes you can catch the smell of the roses in the conservatory. And sometimes, just sometimes, you imagine what it might be like to walk barefoot in the garden and not have anyone watching at all. There is a room in the house that's tucked quietly above the grand drawing room and beneath the attic where the maids sleep. A room that doesn't smell of roast dinners or coal dust, but something softer: lavender water, chalk dust and warm milk. This is the nursery. Not the sterile, pastel-coloured vision you might expect, but a world unto itself. A kingdom ruled by women in aprons and children in boots, where manners meet milk teeth and growing up is both inevitable and carefully choreographed. As a child in an Edwardian household, the nursery is where you live most of your life. You sleep here, you eat here, you play here, cry here, recover from illness here, and quietly wait for adulthood to begin. Your days are managed to the minute, and the outside world, those glittering drawing rooms, smoky studies and fragrant gardens, belongs to someone else. You see it through the windows or on supervised walks. But this is your world. 4 walls, striped wallpaper, wooden veranda beds, and a hierarchy as real as the one downstairs. The nurse is in charge. She may not be titled or well paid, but she carries an authority that rivals the butler's. She knows when someone has a fever before the child knows it themselves. She remembers every birthday, every dietary preference, every tantrum, and every tattered toy someone refuses to part with. She is firm but fair, sweet but unyielding. She can change a bandage with one hand while calming a baby with the other. And if the nursery maid falls behind on cleaning or a stocking drawer is untidy, she'll fix it before the housekeeper ever notices. She runs a tight ship and no one, not even the governess, dares interfere. Your bed is narrow, with stiff sheets, a wool blanket, and one treasured toy, perhaps a bear with a crooked nose or a doll with hair made of real human strands. The floorboards creak in familiar ways. At night, the oil lamp flickers just enough to cast long shadows, but not enough to be frightening. The fireplace throws a modest glow when lit, and if it's cold, the nurse brings in a hot water bottle wrapped in flannel. But only if you've behaved that day. The nursery meals are their own little ritual. Breakfast is porridge, maybe an egg, and weak tea. Lunch is predictable, broth, bread, fruit when it's available, and biscuits if someone's been especially good, or if the cook has made extra. Dinner is early, plain, and taken in silence if someone was caught whispering during lessons. Everything is served on small plates. No silver, no fuss. But the manners, just as strict. Forks must be held properly, no slurping, and God help you if you reach across the table. Afternoons are for recreation, though that's a bit generous. You might have some time to read or sew or play with your siblings, but even that is gently supervised. The toys are meant to teach, not entertain. A Noah's Ark with mismatched animals, wooden blocks with the alphabet, a faded abacus, a book of riddles. The favourite toy of the hour often depends on what's allowed, and what's quietly snuck out from under the bed after the nurse has turned her back. Games are quiet. Dolls are dressed and undressed endlessly. Battles are fought between tin soldiers. Tea parties are staged with imaginary guests who always remember their manners. You don't climb the furniture. You don't jump on the beds. If you're lucky enough to be outside, you don't stray too far from the nurse's shadow. There is freedom, but only within borders, like a bird let loose inside a conservatory. Now here's a delightful but slightly eerie detail. Some nurseries were equipped with voice tubes, an early intercom system that allowed the nurse to call down to the kitchen or for a maid without ever leaving the children. Which means, of course, that even in your most private moments, those quiet chats with your siblings, those whispered stories before sleep, there might be someone listening. The nursery also holds your wardrobe. Not in a fashionable sense, but in the sense that everything you own fits neatly into a wooden chest or two. You have your day clothes, little sailor suits or pinafores, and your best clothes, only worn for church or when you're summoned downstairs to say hello to a guest. Everything is practical, durable, and slightly itchy. Shoes are shined but sometimes stiff, socks slide down your legs like defiant caterpillars, and hats, always hats. If you so much as sneeze near the front door, a bonnet will be on your head before you can say, "I'm not cold." Bath time is its own operation. A copper tub is carried in, placed near the fire, and filled with hot water hauled up by the maid. You're bathed quickly, thoroughly, and without sentimentality. Your hair is washed once a week, usually on Saturdays, and detangling it is a battle you lose every time. Soap stings, towels scratch, but the nurse rubs you down briskly and sets you in fresh nightclothes before tucking you into bed. No bedtime stories unless you're especially good. Maybe a hymn, maybe a stern reminder to stop biting your nails. And yet, for all its constraints, the nursery isn't without warmth. There's affection, even if it's structured. The nurse might smooth your hair or slip you a boiled sweet when you're sick. The governess might smile genuinely when you read your lines perfectly. Your siblings become allies. You invent your own mythology. The toys have names. The fireplace has moods. The wardrobe creaks at night. And you're not entirely convinced it doesn't breathe. Childhood seeps through the cracks in the routine, soft and sneaky. Still, you're reminded daily that this phase is temporary. Everything is pushing you toward adulthood, measured, proper and productive. Boys are told often about school and empire and duty. Girls hear whispers of coming-out dresses, of embroidery work, of the husbands waiting just beyond the horizon. No one asks what you want to be. The path is already paved. Your only job is to walk it without stumbling. There's a quiet kind of sadness to it all. You see glimpses of the larger house, rooms you're not allowed in, parties you're not invited to, people who look at you like they're seeing a future investment. You feel the distance between yourself and your parents not as cruelty, but as inevitability. They love you, but from a distance. From a well-appointed drawing room that smells like bergamot and leather, not milk and liniment. And so you go to sleep each night tucked in tight, the embers in the hearth fading to a glow, the nursery settling into its hush. The world outside remains vast and dazzling, but here, inside your little room above the fray, you dream in smaller shapes, of new ribbons, of slightly warmer porridge, of maybe, just maybe, being allowed to read for 10 minutes longer before the lamp is snuffed. When it comes to Edwardian shopping, you don't just pop out for a loaf of bread and a bottle of milk. You proceed. Shopping isn't a mundane task. It's a carefully choreographed social excursion, a fusion of necessity and performance. Whether you're the lady of the house browsing fine muslins at Liberty's or the kitchen maid haggling with the fishmonger in a muddy apron, the act of acquiring goods is soaked in meaning, class, taste, control, and above all timing. Let's begin with the upper crust, shall we? If you're the mistress of the house and you're in town, London preferably, your options are vast, and your purpose is rarely just about groceries. You might set out mid-morning in a smart walking dress, gloves buttoned, hat tilted just so. A footman trails you or rides on the carriage, which is summoned not by need, but by expectation. After all, you wouldn't walk to Bond Street like a common shop girl. Your first stop might be a department store, Harrods or Selfridges if you're feeling modern. These are not places for rushed lists and bulk buys. They are retail cathedrals, offering everything from lace collars to live parrots. Yes, really. You're not just buying, you're visiting. A clerk greets you by name, shows you a selection of parasols you didn't know you needed, and offers you a cup of tea. You examine ribbons, you pretend to debate perfume, and of course you linger near the glove counter long enough to be noticed by anyone whose opinion matters. There's no shame in browsing, quite the opposite. It's about being seen, considering expensive things, even if you don't buy them. You might send your selections to be delivered later. You might leave empty-handed. The point isn't the package, it's the presence. Now, if you're running the household rather than just appearing in it, your shopping day looks entirely different. The cook, or more often the kitchen maid, receives a list from the housekeeper. It includes meat, fish, eggs, dairy, fresh produce and dry goods, often annotated with terse little reminders like, "Not last week's bacon," or "Liver only if fresh." She wraps herself in a shawl, tucks the list into a cracked leather purse, and sets out on foot. The local high street is a constellation of specialty shops. No supermarkets here. The butcher knows her name, and he also knows she won't fall for his Monday sausages that have definitely seen too many Tuesdays. The fishmonger is friendlier, especially if she's polite, but she knows the scales always lie. She watches them carefully. The grocer offers apples that look fresh, but she peels one on the spot to be sure. She asks about the flowers mill. She sniffs the tea. She knows that if the master finds a single weevil in the rice, she'll be the one on the receiving end of the housekeeper's very calm, very terrifying disappointment. The transactions are brisk. Pennies are counted, baskets weighed down. She might bargain gently. Not too much. Edwardian class expectations apply even to servants. You're expected to know your place, but you're also expected not to be a fool. She lugs it all back, uphill, arms aching, and still has to sort, prep and report before lunch. And no, she doesn't get to sample the pears. Let's take a moment to admire the sheer logistics of Edwardian food supply. Refrigeration isn't standard yet, so things must be bought in small amounts, and frequently. Iceboxes exist, but are unreliable and reserved for wealthier homes. That means milk sours quickly. Fish must be eaten the day it's bought. Bread dries out if left uncovered for even an afternoon. Shopping is not a weekly event, it's a daily campaign. And here's a quirky little gem for today. Some Edwardian households maintained a household journal, a sort of ledger/diary where every item purchased was recorded by the housekeeper. It included costs, supplier names, and sometimes comments like "Fishman late again," or "Mrs. Dalloway sent poorer ham than usual." These journals were both budgeting tools and social weapons. If a supplier's goods dipped in quality, they might mysteriously stop receiving orders, or worse, receive a politely worded note of disappointment written on monogrammed stationery. Now, if you're in the country, things shift again. Many estates are largely self-sufficient, or at least pretend to be. Eggs come from your own hens. Vegetables are grown in the kitchen garden. The gamekeeper supplies the table with rabbit or pheasant, depending on the season. The dairyman delivers milk daily from a neighbouring farm, and the gardener provides enough rhubarb to keep the cook muttering through the summer. but you still need items from town: soap, butter, spices, jam if the fruit harvest is bad. So once or twice a week the trap is hitched, and someone, likely the under-housemaid or a trusted footman, heads into the village with a list. They're expected to return promptly, not talk to anyone they shouldn't, and avoid looking like they're enjoying themselves. Shopping may be essential, but fun is absolutely forbidden between errands. Let's not forget now mail orders. Yes, Edwardians had catalogues. If you needed a new gown, a bolt of muslin, or a special German toy for your niece, you could browse the pages of a thick paper catalogue and place an order by post. Weeks later your parcel would arrive, often in straw-packed crates or wrapped in wax paper, smelling faintly of warehouse and ambition. For rural families, this was a lifeline to modernity, proof that even if you lived hours from London, you could still dress like a duchess and serve imported olives. There's an ongoing scholarly discussion about whether Edwardian shopping empowered women or trapped them in consumerist roles. Some argue that frequent shopping gave women, especially mistresses and housekeepers, real influence, control over suppliers, budgets, and even community politics. Others point out that it tied them more tightly to the domestic sphere, making them permanent fixtures of an endless procurement loop. It's likely both. With every purchase, a woman reinforced the household's status, but also her own unpaid labour. Back at the house, parcels are unwrapped, receipts tallied, and goods inspected. Apples are placed in bowls, flowers arranged in vases, fish chilled with urgency. The mistress might examine a new ribbon or smell a sample of face cream. The housekeeper checks quantities. The cook, without saying much, sniffs the butter and squints at the cheese. A single bad item can cause a chain reaction of complaints that ripple from pantry to parlour, and when it's all done, the baskets are folded away, the receipts filed, and the next list is started, because tomorrow it begins again. If luncheon is a slow-moving rehearsal, then dinner in an Edwardian household is the full performance. Lights, costumes, choreography and all. It's not just a meal, it's the day's crescendo, a ritual of class and manners polished so thoroughly you could see your reflection in the gravy. This is when every room, every person, and every perfectly folded napkin works in unison to remind everyone, guests, family, servants, and the universe itself, that your household is still very much in command of its image. The preparation begins hours earlier, of course. Downstairs, the cook is deep into battle with roasts and sauces, her kitchen apron already a battlefield of flour and meat drippings. The kitchen smells of singed herbs and ambition. Puddings are boiling in cloth bags, custards are cooling. Stock is being strained so obsessively it could pass as holy water. Dishes are plated not just for flavour, but for elegance. Every leaf of garnish, every dollop of cream, every carefully peeled grape, yes, that's a thing, is placed with ceremonial precision. Meanwhile, upstairs, the transformation is underway. The house shifts, lamps are lit, fires are stoked, the drawing room cushions are fluffed like they've just fainted. The butler polishes the final goblet and inspects the dining table with the intensity of a general before battle. He paces around the perimeter, straightening cutlery, measuring the placement of the crystal. He double-checks the silver service, ensures the soup spoons match the fish forks, and that the napkins are folded into discreet swans or fans, depending on the tone of the evening. And then there's you. You can't just go to dinner, you must dress for it. Formal evening wear is not optional. For men, this means black tailcoat, white tie, stiff white waistcoat, and a shirt starched so sharply it could double as a weapon. Cufflinks must be gold or mother of pearl. Shoes must shine like wet ink. The valet assists in the assembly, of course, making sure your collar is aligned and your trousers don't reveal any unspeakable ankles. For women, dressing for dinner is an act of transformation. Corset redrawn, tighter. Hair redone with more gloss and curl. Jewellery brought out like holy relics. Evening gowns are made of silk, velvet or gauze, often adorned with lace beading or embroidery so intricate it looks like it's trying to whisper family secrets. The lady's maid lays everything out with reverence. She fastens clasps, adjusts sashes, sprays perfume at just the right moment. Not too much, but enough to suggest mystery and expense. The gong sounds. Yes, really. A dinner gong. It rings through the house, a deep melodic summons that declares, "This is it, show time," and you descend the stairs slowly, gracefully, ideally making your entrance just a hair behind schedule to give others a moment to admire your effort. In the drawing room, pre-dinner drinks are served. sherry, Madeira, or perhaps a champagne cocktail if someone's feeling continental. There's small talk, arranged seating, quiet competition for the ear of the most interesting guest. The host glances at the clock, nods to the butler, and the call is made. Dinner is served. The dining room doors swing open like a stage curtain. The table glows with candlelight. Flowers are arranged in low bowls to avoid blocking eye contact. Cutlery lines up like soldiers. Every guest has a name card. You are led in by rank, oldest to youngest, highest title to lowest connection. A peer of the realm gets precedence. A cousin from the country might bring up the rear. It's a ladder, and everyone knows exactly which rung they're on. The meal begins with soup, not too thick, just enough body to justify a spoon. Then comes the fish course, light, flaky, sometimes smothered in a sauce that tastes faintly of lemon and regret. Then an entree, chicken, lamb, or perhaps a stuffed quail if the cook's in a daring mood. Then roast, beef, duck, venison if it's shooting season. Sides flow in and out like choreography. Creamed potatoes, asparagus, petit pois, all served with synchronized grace by the footman. A pause, then the remove, often a cold dish, like galantine or a moulded aspic that shimmers unnaturally under the chandelier. Then the pudding, something rich, like spotted dick or plum souffle, followed by cheese, then fruit. Finally, dessert wines, and throughout wine. Pairings, claret, burgundy, port, delivered with such gravitas you'd think they were curing disease. The rules of dining are absolute. Forks are used from the outside in. Napkins are unfolded, not shaken. You never place a used spoon on the tablecloth. You never salt your food before tasting it. That would be an insult to the cook and by extension your own breeding. Talking with your mouth full is a crime punishable by social exile. You speak only to the person on your right for the first course, and then the person on your left for the second. This is structured conversation. And it's not just about etiquette. It's about performance. Every guest is on stage. The laughter is curated. The smiles are rehearsed. You are here to eat, yes, but more importantly, you are here to be seen eating well. To glide through a meal with such poise and polish that no one remembers what you said, only how exquisitely you held your knife. Here's a bizarre little historical side note. Some particularly elite hosts hired dining tutors for their children, people whose sole job was to teach the art of the dinner table. Correct posture, glassware knowledge, how to slice a pear without collapsing into fruit salad. All vital if you hope to marry well or avoid embarrassing yourself in front of the Marquis of wherever. There's a persistent academic debate about whether Edwardian dinners were truly about enjoyment. Were they pleasant, or just elaborate power rituals? Some scholars suggest that while the food might be delicious, the stress of performance, especially for those outside the inner circle, could render it nearly unbearable. Others argue these dinners offered rare opportunities for women to exercise influence and diplomacy in a socially sanctioned space. Whichever side you lean toward, one thing is clear. By the end of the meal, everyone is exhausted in the most elegant way possible. The gentlemen may retire to the library for port and cigars, puffing thoughtfully and talking politics. The ladies retreat to the drawing room for coffee, small cakes, and quieter conversation, needlework, the theatre, how difficult it is to find decent lace lately. Eventually the groups rejoin. A final glass of something is offered. Coats are fetched. Names are murmured. Compliments are paid. And the guests step out into the cool night, carefully not wobbling in their shoes or letting the wind undo their hair. Back inside, the butler supervises the clearing of the table. The footman, flushed from the effort and adrenaline, removes the silver. The kitchen glows with heat and leftover triumph. The cook, if pleased, might offer the scullery maid an extra bit of pudding, just this once. And upstairs, in the candle-lit quiet of your room, you unpin your hair, remove your stiff collar, or loosen your corset, and exhale. Finally, the performance is over. You've survived dinner. You've upheld your station. And now, at last, you're allowed to feel hungry. The clatter of forks has faded. The candles on the dining table have burned just low enough to flicker, and the last wine glass has been emptied, or discreetly left half full, depending on whether one was aiming to impress or endure. But the evening isn't over. Oh no, not in an Edwardian household. This is the moment the day begins to soften at the edges, as the family and any lingering guests drift from the battlefield of dinner to the gentler pastures of the drawing room. This is where the pleasures of the evening begin. Not rowdy or spontaneous, but genteel, predictable, and laced with just enough stiffness to remind everyone what century they're in. You cross into the drawing room with a practiced sigh, the kind that says, "That was pleasant but exhausting," even if you didn't understand half of what was discussed at the dinner table. The fire is already lit, the lamps have been turned low, the curtains are drawn, tea is waiting, brewed to that exact pale gold that Edwardians found morally and spiritually correct, with thin slices of lemon laid out beside it in perfect little ovals, like an offering to the gods of etiquette. If you're a lady, you sink into the upholstered armchair like you've just returned from war, remove your gloves with deliberate grace, and smile at the nearest conversational target. If you're a gentleman who's opted out of cigars and port in the library, or if you've returned from them with your whiskers still faintly smelling of Havana, you may lower yourself into a spot on the sofa and pretend to listen as someone recounts the latest scandal at the vicarage. The activities of the evening vary, but only within a very tight, laced-up circle of acceptability. Card games are common: whist, bridge, patience if someone's feeling solitary. Not high stakes, mind you. Gambling is frowned upon unless you're doing it at your gentleman's club with people rich enough to pretend money doesn't matter. But a polite hand or two among friends? Entirely acceptable, provided no one reveals too much competitive glee. Music is another pillar of evening entertainment. If there's a piano, it's opened reverently and someone, usually the daughter of the house or the pretty cousin visiting from Surrey, is summoned to play. The pieces are carefully chosen, nothing too passionate, too modern, or too German. Mendelssohn is safe, Chopin is allowable if delicate. Wagner? Only if you're trying to stir up trouble. The music floats softly through the room, and no one claps loudly when it ends. That would be vulgar. A quiet, lovely, simply lovely is more appropriate. Sometimes someone reads aloud. A bit of Tennyson. Maybe a chapter from a serialized novel. This is only enjoyable if the reader has a good voice and doesn't pause too often to clear their throat. It's not about the content, it's about the tone. The room is a stage, and every voice, every sigh, every gentle chuckle is part of the script. You're performing civility. Relaxed, cultured, slightly bored civility. Now let's drop in our curious fringe fact for the night. Many households kept a parlour game book, a literal ledger of which games had been played on which evenings, who had won, and what topics had been discussed. It wasn't just memory keeping, it was social strategy. You didn't want to repeat the same topic of conversation 2 Thursdays in a row, and if Mrs. Caldwell always beat everyone at whist, you might diplomatically nudge her toward the piano instead next time. For younger people, and by that we mean those between 16 and 24 because time starts early and ends early in Edwardian society, evening entertainment is one of the few socially acceptable places to flirt. Subtly, of course. An offered card, a shared piano bench, glance across the room during a dramatic reading, nothing overt. But if your parents are watching, and they are, you're permitted to be charming, provided it never tips into passion or, heaven forbid, enthusiasm. Tea is often accompanied by light refreshment. Little cakes, sugared almonds, preserved fruit. Nothing too heavy. This isn't a time for sustenance. It's about indulgence in miniature, bites so small they disappear on the tongue, and leave no room for guilt or complaint. If there's chocolate, it's likely from Switzerland. If there are biscuits, they've probably been arranged in a symmetrical pattern on a doily-covered tray. The tone of the evening is a balancing act. Too lively and it becomes improper. Too dull and someone might drop off mid-conversation. So you aim for pleasant mediocrity, witty but not sharp, interested but not invested. You nod a lot. You smile even more. You say things like, "Indeed," and "quite," and "how amusing," even if your inner monologue is screaming for a pillow and an escape rope made of piano wire. Of course, for the host or hostess, this is far from relaxing. They are monitoring everything, the flow of conversation, the shifting alliances, the energy of the room. Did Mrs. Linton take offence at the remark about Belgium? Is the young baronet eyeing the wrong sister? Is the tea too weak? The hostess may appear serene, but under the surface she's mentally sprinting in heels, trying to keep the evening on track while smiling like a painted statue. There's a scholarly debate, believe it or not, over whether this kind of enforced socialising improved community bonds, or just slowly drove everyone quietly mad. Some argue it taught empathy, poise, and a sense of shared ritual. Others claim it reinforced social roles so rigidly that no one ever got to know anyone outside of their mask. There's truth on both sides. It depends whether you were born into the part you're playing or if you're still hoping someone will let you improvise. Eventually, the hour grows late, or late in Edwardian terms, which is anything past 10:30. Guests make their excuses, coats are fetched, hands are shaken lightly. No hugs, no lingering. You walk them to the door, thank them, assure them the pleasure was yours, and then close the door with a sigh so perfectly timed it feels rehearsed. Then it's over. You return to the drawing room. The chairs are askew. The fire is dying. Someone left a card half finished on the table. The piano lid is down, the tea cold, and for a brief moment the silence is not oppressive. It's relief. If you're lucky, no one said the wrong thing, no one spilled tea on the rug, no one noticed you dozing during the poetry reading. You survived the evening, with your dignity intact and your shoes still on, while the family lounges upstairs with their teacups and tactfully edited small talk. Another dinner is unfolding deep in the belly of the house, one you won't find mentioned in the court circular. This is the servants' dinner, held not in candlelight but beneath gas lamps that hiss faintly overhead. There's no bone china, no engraved name cards, no butler with a ruler measuring fork placement. But make no mistake, this meal has its own formality, its own pecking order, and more than its share of unspoken rules. It usually begins sometime between 7 and 8 o'clock after the family's dinner has been served, cleared, and the kitchen returned to a semblance of sanity. The timing varies depending on how elaborate the upstairs menu was. If the cook has just managed a 10-course symphony complete with ornamental aspic and flaming pudding, the staff might eat late, tired, and mildly resentful. If it was a light supper, cold meats and soup, then dinner comes earlier, and everyone's in a marginally better mood. The dining space is the servants' hall. Long table, mismatched chairs, linoleum or bare wood underfoot, and a large fireplace that usually smokes just a little. There are no floral arrangements. The walls might be adorned with a faded print or two, a pastoral scene, or maybe Queen Victoria looking vaguely disappointed in everyone. But the real decoration here is noise. Laughter, muttering, chair legs scraping the floor, the rattle of cutlery not bound by etiquette. Seating is strict, and everyone knows where they belong. The butler sits at the head of the table, even here. On his right, the housekeeper, regal in black bombazine, her keys jangling softly as she lowers herself into her chair. Then come the senior staff, the cook, the lady's maid, the valet, the first footman. Further down sit the younger housemaids, kitchen staff and scullery maid, who often eats in the kitchen itself or waits until everyone else has finished. The food is hearty and plain. None of the artistic flourishes from the family's table make it down here, and that's just fine. Plates are piled with roast beef, mutton stew, boiled potatoes, cabbage or turnips depending on the season, and plenty of bread. Gravy is served from a large jug, not a silver boat, and everyone pours their own. Dessert, if it appears, is likely something like spotted dick or bread pudding, thick, warm and unapologetically brown. And yet the meal is not without rules. You don't speak until grace is said, not by a vicar, but often by the butler or housekeeper, delivered quickly and without much piety. You don't interrupt the senior staff, even if they're loudly wrong about something. You don't reach across the table, you certainly don't slouch, and you eat what you're given. Complaining about the food is not just rude, it's unwise. The cook may be overworked and underpraised, but she has ears like a hawk and a long memory. Cross her, and you might find your next slice of pie mysteriously smaller than everyone else's. Still, it's the most relaxed point in the day. Faces that have held polite blankness for hours begin to soften. Laughter bubbles up, especially down at the junior end of the table where the footmen and housemaids sit. There's teasing about who spilled what, who nearly tripped over the cat, who's been seen brushing their hair a little too often when a certain someone walks by. There are whispers about the guests upstairs, who look tired, who look bored, who look like they might have had one sherry too many. And gossip, of course. This is where it thrives. Someone's seen a note exchanged between the second housemaid and the gardener's boy. Someone else swears they overheard the cook arguing with the grocer again. The underbutler knows which guest asked for hot water 3 times last night and what that probably means. The housekeeper says nothing, but she hears everything, and her raised eyebrow at a too loud whisper is enough to end the conversation mid-sentence. Here's a curious historical footnote. Some large houses actually employed a servant called the hall boy, a sort of apprentice to the household, who did every grim, thankless job imaginable. Emptying chamber pots, scrubbing boots, fetching coal, running errands for everyone. At meals, he didn't even sit at the table. He stood and waited until the rest had finished, then ate whatever was left, often in the scullery alone, a single rung below the scullery maid, if that gives you an idea. And yet, that position was a foot in the door. Many butlers and valets began their careers that way, enduring years of cold stew and blisters in the name of eventual authority and a decent waistcoat. Despite the hierarchy, camaraderie sometimes forms, a joke here, a shared glance there. The long hours forge unlikely bonds. The lady's maid might secretly pass the kitchen maid a second helping of pudding. The first footman might sneak the scullery girl an extra slice of ham when the cook isn't looking. These small kindnesses don't erase the class divide, but they stitch something human into the day's rigid fabric. Of course, not everyone is friendly. Rivalries exist. The lady's maid and the housemaid may be locked in a quiet war over some imagined slight. The undercook might nurse a grudge because the kitchen maid got a compliment last Thursday. The footman, competitive by nature and fashion, can be downright savage when it comes to polishing boots or tying cravats. The servants' hall is a community, but it's also a jungle. Everyone's jostling for favour, security, and maybe, if they're lucky, a path up the ladder. There's a debate among historians about whether the servants' hall was truly a refuge or just an extension of the workday. Some accounts describe it as a place of laughter, solidarity, and even romance. Others paint a picture of stifling rules, emotional exhaustion, and relentless supervision. Likely it was both, relief and pressure side by side, much like the fish course and the roast on the family's table. After the meal, there's a brief moment of rest. Chairs lean back. Boots are unlaced. Someone pulls out a deck of cards. Someone else hums a tune. A young maid might sneak out to the backyard for a quick gulp of cool air, face tilted toward the stars. But it's short-lived. There are still boots to clean, fires to check, candles to snuff. Night is coming, and the house must be reset for tomorrow. So they rise from the table. Plates are scraped. Tea things are gathered. And the line between rest and duty blurs once again. Because even in the quiet of the servants' hall, someone is always listening. Someone is always waiting for the next bell to ring. You'd think, after the mountains of beef, gallons of tea, and orchestras of silverware, the Edwardians would finally be allowed to collapse into bed and call it a day. But not so fast. Bedtime is its own elaborate production, complete with stagehands, props, and more layers than a wedding cake. The Edwardians may have dressed for dinner, but they undressed for bed like it was a performance only slightly less important. Let's start with the basics, hygiene, or more accurately, the Edwardian version of it, which is equal parts ritual, guesswork, and a few gallons of tepid water. Bathrooms as we know them were still a novelty. Some grand homes had proper plumbed bathrooms by the early 1900s, full bathtubs, flushing toilets, and basins with running water. Others made do with a washstand in the bedroom, complete with jug and bowl, a sliver of soap in a china dish, and a hand towel that hasn't seen boiling water in weeks. So every night, water is hauled up bucket by bucket, floor by floor, by a poor underpaid maid who's probably spent the whole day scrubbing fireplaces and her own hopes. It arrives lukewarm at best. If you're especially wealthy or especially eccentric, you might have a gas-heated bath. But most nights you make do with a quick splash of water to the face, a rinse of hands and feet, and, if you're truly diligent, a dab of eau de cologne to cover the sins of the day. For ladies, undressing is a full production. The lady's maid stands by, waiting to unbutton, untie and unlace every garment, layer by layer. First the brooch, then the bodice, then the corset, unhooked delicately as though disarming a Victorian time bomb. Petticoats are peeled away, stockings rolled down, and hair is brushed out. 50 to 100 strokes depending on the advice column your maid secretly read. You step into a cotton nightgown or a flannel sleeping robe, depending on the season and how many ghosts you plan to impress. The maid lays out a bed jacket, just in case you're seen during a nighttime emergency. You don't want to face a hallway fire in your nightie. There's dignity to maintain, even mid-crisis. Then you climb into a high-curtained bed, and if you're in the countryside, you may have a warming pan or hot water bottle nestled at your feet. Otherwise, it's just cold toes and prayers that the blankets, multiple, heavy, woolen, don't suffocate you in the night. Gentlemen have it a bit easier. The valet handles undressing, coat off, cufflinks removed, cravat unknotted. He might lay out a smoking jacket for a final cigar on the balcony. Hair is smoothed, face wiped with a damp towel, and then it's into the striped pyjamas or a linen nightshirt that, frankly, would look more appropriate on a shipwreck survivor. Still, it's comfortable, and at least there's no corset involved. Toiletries are kept in a neat little kit. A toothbrush with a bone or ivory handle, a pot of tooth powder, gritty and vaguely minty, a comb, a tiny bottle of tonic for the hair. There's no toothpaste tube, no deodorant stick. Maybe a dab of pomade, maybe a splash of rosewater. A gentleman might shave before bed, or leave it for the morning when the valet can supervise the chin situation with clinical precision. Now for hair washing, rare, calculated, and nearly traumatic. For women it's done weekly at best, sometimes less, using rainwater if possible, or boiled water mixed with Castile soap, egg yolks, or even brandy. Hair is dried by the fire, or, if you're terribly modern, using one of those newfangled hair drying machines that look like a cross between a bicycle pump and a torture device. Men wash their hair more often, usually with soap or vinegar, though opinions vary on whether that improves anything. Toilets or water closets are not always conveniently placed. If your home has one, congratulations, you live in the future. If not, you're still relying on the good old chamber pot, discreetly tucked under the bed or in a small cupboard. If you're a lady, the maid will empty it in the morning. If you're a man, the valet handles it, unless he's new, in which case you get to explain the protocol without looking directly at him. But the evening doesn't end with hygiene. There are rituals to be followed. The lady might read a bit of a devotional, or an improving novel, carefully propped up in bed with bolsters. She might sip a little warm milk or take a tonic recommended by her cousin's doctor's wife's niece. The gentleman might read the newspaper, mutter about politics, or write a short note to the steward. Occasionally letters are written. Thank yous, condolences, a quick inquiry about the availability of trout for next Friday's luncheon. Letter writing is its own form of prayer. Here's a curious little quirk. Some Edwardians believed that sleeping with a window open, even in winter, was good for the constitution. So while the fire blazes in the hearth, the maid cracks a window just slightly, letting in a chill that cuts through the room like a knife made of fog. You shiver under layers of bedding and tell yourself it's healthy. There's also the matter of locks. Bedroom doors are often locked at night, especially by ladies who value privacy or who have read one too many novels about nighttime visitors. Some even keep bells by the bedside, small handbells, to ring if they need the maid or if something dreadful happens, like running out of handkerchiefs or seeing a mouse. Finally, with the fire dimmed, the lamp snuffed, and the doors bolted, the house settles into its slow nightly exhale. The creak of floorboards, the occasional distant cough, the tick of a mantel clock. You roll over, sigh, and pull the heavy covers up to your chin. Sleep isn't just a biological need, it's part of the daily theatre. You rest as you live, properly, quietly, and with a sense of dignified exhaustion. There's a scholarly debate over whether all these nighttime rituals were comforting or oppressive. Some argue they offered structure and familiarity in an unpredictable world. Others point to the physical discomfort of corsets, freezing water, and the exhausting need to be composed even in the dark. Perhaps it was both. Sleep was the only place one could truly let go, if only for a few hours. Downstairs, the maids finish the last of the cleaning. The cook finally hangs up her apron. The hall boy empties the slop pails, and the butler checks the locks one final time before disappearing into his own modest chamber. And above, the house sleeps, layered in linen, wool, and class expectations, each occupant curled up in their own silence, waiting for morning's first bell to ring, and the show to begin again. Mornings in an Edwardian household don't so much begin as they assemble themselves. They start before you're even awake, with the silent choreography of servants tiptoeing through the corridors like ghosts with mops. Long before the lady of the house stretches beneath her mountain of quilts, or the master groans at the chime of the mantel clock, the house has already begun to stir, creak, and polish itself into another day of precision. The first to rise is the scullery maid. Poor thing, she's up in the freezing dark, often around 5, to start scrubbing the kitchen range and lighting the fires. If you think your job is tough, imagine hauling coal in your nightgown before the sun's even considered clocking in. She moves quietly through the kitchen like a soot-covered mouse, prepping for the cook, washing last night's pans and boiling water by the gallon for every other servant who thinks hot water just magically appears in jugs. Next comes the kitchen maid, yawning and rubbing her eyes but moving fast because the cook likes punctuality, silence and proper posture, even when chopping onions. The range is going, the smell of baking bread starts to fill the air, and the servants' breakfast, their modest, crumbly salvation, is on its way. Upstairs, the housemaids get moving. Their job is to sweep through the bedrooms like an invisible breeze, leaving no trace of their passing except the smell of lavender polish and the faint sound of carpets being beaten into submission. They carry trays of hot water, open shutters, shake out bedding, and relight the fireplaces if the rooms have them. They are expected to move fast, but quietly, like cats with tea trays. Around the same time, the butler emerges from his quarters in full uniform, not a thread out of place, despite the fact that he was up late the night before locking doors and cataloguing port bottles. He reviews the day's calendar, confers with the housekeeper, and checks the front door for smudges. Always the smudges. You can be rich as Midas, but if your front brass is dull, people will talk. By now the lady's maid is knocking softly at the mistress's door, carrying a tray with her morning tea, weak but hot, served with 2 lumps of sugar and just a whisper of cream. She lays out the day's undergarments, brushes out the hair from last night's routine, and sets out 2 or 3 possible dresses. It's only breakfast, but she still needs to look effortlessly presentable. The lady might chat. She might sit quietly while her maid laces up her corset tighter than the laws of nature allow. Either way, she'll be downstairs by 8:30, prepared to ask after the weather with the calm authority of a duchess reviewing troop movements. The gentleman's valet, meanwhile, is doing his own brand of quiet magic, warming the shaving water, laying out the day's suit, brushed, pressed, and smelling faintly of cedar and starch. He polishes the boots if needed, helps with the cufflinks, advises subtly against the green tie the master always insists on wearing, but never quite pulls off. Once dressed, the master might glance at the newspaper left beside his teacup, carefully ironed by the butler to remove creases, in case you're wondering whether anything is ever done halfway in this house. Then comes the formal breakfast, not the servant's meal, which was scarfed down an hour ago with barely a grunt. No, this is the family's version. In wealthier homes, it's served in the breakfast room, light-filled, quiet, and reeking of marmalade and respectability. The family trickles in one by one, greeting each other like distant diplomats sharing a continent. No shouting, no rushing, just gentle morning civility. The table is a spread of promise: eggs, sausages, porridge, kippers, grilled tomatoes, toast in silver rack, which is always slightly cold, because that's how toast works when it's given the royal treatment. There's also coffee, tea, and orange juice. For the daring few who believe in fruit before noon. The butler serves, assisted by a footman, who stands as straight as a hat stand and speaks even less. Conversation is minimal. The newspaper rustles. A few observations are made about the garden or the latest letter from Cousin Maud. No one discusses anything too dramatic. Mornings are delicate, and Edwardians believed in easing into the day like you're soaking into a lukewarm bath. Now let's flip perspectives. Downstairs, while all this quiet elegance unfolds, the remaining staff are scrubbing floors, polishing brass, and setting up for the next meal. Breakfast isn't a pause, it's just a marker in the schedule. The cook's already prepping luncheon. The housekeeper is reviewing the linen cupboard. The gardener is hauling baskets of cut flowers up to the back door. Life below stairs never slows, not even during what upstairs folk call a leisurely morning. Here's a wonderfully niche fact for your mental collection. In some households, breakfast times were staggered based on rank. The mistress might eat at 8:30, the master at 9:00, and the children separately altogether. The governess, being neither servant nor family, might eat her breakfast alone in silence, perched on the edge of social invisibility with her tea cooling beside her. There's debate among historians about the purpose of this elaborate morning division. Some say it was purely practical, different schedules, different needs. Others argue it reinforced the class structure, making sure everyone remembered their place before they'd even finished their eggs. Likely it was a bit of both. The Edwardian day didn't just run on clocks, it ran on hierarchy, reinforced every time someone poured your tea or wiped your shoes without expecting a thank you. As breakfast ends, the butler clears the dishes. The lady of the house might dictate a few letters or review the afternoon's calls. The master may vanish into the study, pipe in hand, muttering about his state business or parliamentary nonsense. The maids return to make the beds properly now that the family's gone, smoothing sheets until they look like fresh paper. And the house, now fully awake, slips into its usual rhythm. Bells ring, boots echo across the hallway. The smell of baking bread returns, chased by beeswax polish and the faint tang of coal smoke. There's still a whole day ahead, full of social visits, housekeeping, and at least 3 more outfit changes. But it all begins with this: early footsteps, quiet trays, and the smell of tea warming in the cold dawn air. The Edwardian day doesn't unfold, it marches, neatly buttoned and crisply scheduled. And after the dust of breakfast has settled, and the fire grates have all been emptied, we reach one of the most peculiar and charming parts of the routine, the social visit. It's a ritual that sits somewhere between leisure activity and battlefield manoeuvring, where calling cards are weapons, conversation is armour, and missteps can haunt you all the way to the end of the season. Let's say you're the lady of the house. By mid-morning, you've been dressed, breakfasted, and briefed. You've reviewed your correspondence with the steady gaze of a monarch scanning state papers. Some letters you answer. Others you pretend not to have received, particularly the ones from that dreadful woman who smells like pickled beets and wears hats that look like they might flap away in a strong breeze. And then comes the moment of decision. Who shall you call on today? Who will you grace with your delicate, structured presence? You don't just show up. That would be madness. Edwardian society is obsessed with the ritual of the morning call, though, in true backwards fashion, it actually takes place in the afternoon. If it is before noon, you're a savage. 3 o'clock is ideal, 4 is acceptable, 5 is pushing it, and if you arrive after that, you may as well be announcing a duel. You prepare by selecting a walking suit. Stylish, but demure. Nothing too daring unless you're specifically trying to provoke Aunt Gertrude's palpitations. Gloves are essential, even in July. A hat pinned at precisely the angle to suggest you're interesting but not scandalous. A parasol, because no Edwardian lady lets the sun touch her directly. Your maid ensures your skirts are brushed free of lint and your shoes polished to a state of near blindness. And of course you carry your calling cards. Small, cream-coloured rectangles embossed with your name, subtly scented if you're feeling extra. The coach is brought around, or if you're very modern, you might even ride in one of those terrifying new motor cars, though only if the dust won't ruin your gloves. You pull up to the house of your intended victim, acquaintance, and hand your card to the footman at the door. If the lady of the house is at home, you'll be shown in. If she is not, conveniently or strategically, your card will be accepted and your polite duty will be considered fulfilled. You weren't rejected, you were simply too early, or too late, or uninteresting. Assuming you are received, you'll be ushered into the drawing room where everything smells faintly of violets and controlled anxiety. You sit just on the edge of the settee, never too relaxed, never fully leaning back. The hostess appears in a gown only marginally more impressive than yours, and the conversation begins. How one's roses are faring, whether the new curate is a touch too cheerful, what dreadful things Lady Welling said at the musicale. Nothing too deep, of course. The point isn't to reveal your soul, it's to prove you still belong here. Tea is usually served, but don't get excited. It's not about the tea, it's about how you drink it. With a gloved hand? Unthinkable. Pinky raised? Vulgar. Slurping? You may as well leave the country. You sip, you compliment the biscuits, and you feign interest in the hostess's latest embroidery project, which appears to be the 6th in a series of identical peacocks. A standard call lasts 15 minutes. Any longer, and you risk appearing too eager. Any shorter, and you're signalling offence. You thank your hostess, decline a second biscuit with just enough hesitation to seem polite and rise. Gloves back on, hat adjusted. Another card left discreetly for the master of the house, because even he must be acknowledged, even if he's probably in the library trying to avoid you. Now let's shift to the receiving end. If you're the one being visited, your day is even more complicated. You're expected to be at home during specific hours, usually 2 to 4 on certain days, and heaven help you if you accidentally answer the door in your petticoats because you forgot it's Thursday, and Mrs. Winslow never misses a Thursday. You must be dressed, composed and capable of discussing your parlour wallpaper as though it's been touched by angels. Servants play a crucial role in all of this. The butler or maid at the door must know exactly who is allowed in and who isn't. A good butler can reject someone with nothing but a slight incline of the head. A bad one might let in your rival, who then overstays her welcome, comments on your curtains, and casually mentions her new sapphire brooch at 8 separate times. There's a charming oddity here. In some households, the hierarchy of visitors was tracked in a calling book, where names, dates and remarks were recorded. Notes might read, Mrs. Fairley called, looked tired, or Miss Rose, hat entirely inappropriate. These books were private social maps used to navigate friendships, favours and grudges. The Edwardians were masters of the passive-aggressive ledger. Men had their own version of calling, though with far less frill. A gentleman might call on a neighbour to discuss estate matters, arrange a hunting date, or simply assert his presence in the area. These calls were often made in libraries or smoking rooms, and they usually involved whiskey and not much eye contact. A good visit could last 7 minutes and contain fewer than 30 words. Ideal, really. There's debate among historians about whether the calling ritual was a genuine form of connection or just elaborate gatekeeping. Some argue that it allowed women, especially, to form networks of support and shared influence. Others see it as emotional theatre, where every conversation was coded and every compliment suspicious. One thing's for sure, calling wasn't optional, it was survival. Refusing to return a visit, or failing to acknowledge a card could damage your reputation more effectively than actual crime. And what of those who were left out? The governesses, the unmarried cousins, the socially unsure. They watched the parade from a distance, received few cards, and were rarely invited to call. If they did go, it was often alone, hat clenched too tightly, hoping the butler would say, "She is at home," and not, "She is unfortunately out." The line between belonging and being politely ignored was very, very thin. As the afternoon wanes and the tea sets are cleared, the lady of the house removes her hat, kicks off her shoes beneath the chaise longue, and finally exhales. The cards collected that day are laid out and studied. Which neighbours made the effort? Who is worth calling on next week? Who is slowly sliding down the invisible ladder of respectability? And outside, in parlours and drawing rooms across the countryside, others are doing the same. Reading the clues, interpreting the silences, and planning their next move in this slow, civilised chess game of society. Let's take a moment to step outside, shall we? Not just beyond the front door, but beyond the velvet-curtained drawing rooms, the thudding of servant boots, and the endless parade of teacups. Because while the Edwardian home is a stage set of etiquette and expectation, the garden, is something altogether different. Out here, amid clipped hedges and prim gravel paths, something almost resembling relaxation stirs beneath the rigid layers of society. If you are part of a well-off Edwardian family, chances are you own some patch of private greenery. It may be a walled city garden brimming with hydrangeas and neighbourhood envy, or an expansive country estate with groves, orchards, fountains, and a sundial that no one's checked since the Crimean War. Either way, the garden isn't just a nice view. It's an outdoor extension of your character, your fortune, and your moral hygiene. The lady of the house takes her garden very seriously. Not necessarily in the get-your-hands-dirty sense, that's what the undergardeners are for, but as a place to be seen. You walk it, you comment on it, you host teas beneath the pergola. Perhaps you even consult with the head gardener on the location of a new rose bed. You know just enough Latin to pronounce Rosa rugosa with confidence and just enough restraint not to point at weeds. Mornings in the garden are especially sacred. There's dew on the grass, bees on the lavender, and the faint sound of someone far off trimming box hedges with the focused joy of a man who never wants to speak to another human being. You take your parasol and a book you won't read, walk in measured strides along the crushed stone path, and feel very proud of yourself for engaging with nature, just not too directly. Children are sometimes allowed in the garden, but only under strict supervision. Running is tolerated, shouting is not. Climbing trees is right out, unless you're a boy under the age of 10 and have a governess with a forgiving heart. Most children are steered toward the neatly maintained lawn or sent to the rose arbour, where they can pretend to have picnics with dolls and be lectured on the classical origins of the daffodil. And speaking of picnics, there's no such thing as a spontaneous one in Edwardian England. Every picnic is a production. Blankets must be spotless, baskets filled with meat pies, seed cake, lemonade, and neatly wrapped sandwiches. The butler or footmen transport the hampers and arrange everything under the supervision of the lady of the house, who may or may not bring a small silver bell to summon more napkins. You sit, you nibble, you compliment the strawberries, and you pretend not to notice the ants, who of course have no idea they've stumbled into a grade A social performance. Let's not forget the tennis lawn, if you have one. Tennis is one of the few physical activities considered acceptable in polite society, partly because it requires elegant clothing and minimal sweating. Matches are social, often flirtatious, with ladies in flowing white gowns and gentlemen in spotless trousers pretending not to show off. The clack of the ball, the cheers, the occasional mock outrage, it all plays well under the sun, especially with refreshments waiting just off court. Now, here's a quirky fact for you. In many country homes, Paths were laid out not just for aesthetic value, but for strategic eavesdropping. Certain turns in the garden brought you within listening distance of others without making it obvious. It's entirely possible that more than one engagement, secret tryst or rivalry was shaped beneath a perfectly symmetrical yew hedge. The garden wasn't just for roses, it was for reconnaissance. Of course, there's an army of people making all this beauty possible. The head gardener is a figure of near mythic status in large estates. He knows every plant's preference, every frost's timing, and possibly where a few bodies are buried, metaphorically of course. Under him work a dozen hands, boys with muddy knees and broken fingernails who rise before dawn and end their day exhausted, sunburned and forbidden from walking on the main lawn. There are greenhouses full of exotic plants carefully misted, compost pits that steam in the early morning, seed catalogues studied like sacred texts. The gardeners don't just tend plants, they maintain order. The Edwardian garden is not wild, it's curated. Nature must be subdued, trimmed and obedient. Wisteria may climb, but only where it's told. Vines that venture too far are snipped back with gentle brutality. The idea of a natural garden existed, yes, but it was carefully planned to look wild while actually being under total control. It's a bit like everything else in Edwardian society, really. Scholars often debate the true purpose of the Edwardian garden. Was it an aesthetic ideal, a class symbol, a psychological refuge? Perhaps it was all of those. In a world so obsessed with rules and roles, the garden offered a rare sort of liminality. A place where you could, for a moment, step out of the drawing room etiquette and into something gentler. You were still on display, yes, but the performance was softer, the script looser. You could daydream among the peonies without someone correcting your fork technique. Afternoon tea in the garden is another ritual entirely. Tables set beneath flowering trees, crisp linens, bone china, sponge cake with raspberry jam. Guests stroll across the lawn, napkins in hand, admiring the dahlias. Conversation floats between "isn't it lovely" and "can you believe the price of tulip bulbs this year?" If you're lucky, someone brings a gramophone and plays a waltz. If you're very unlucky, someone brings a flute and plays at you. Evenings in the garden are quieter. The light softens, the shadows stretch. You might stroll with a guest after dinner, taking a turn by the fountain, perhaps remarking on the night-blooming jasmine. Maybe you pause under the arbour, lean in just slightly, and say something with exactly the right amount of ambiguity. The garden listens, it remembers, it keeps secrets better than any maid ever could. So while the house is a fortress of manners, the garden is a stage of half-whispers, gentle rebellion, and the illusion of ease. Out here, you can laugh too loudly and pretend it was the birds. You can loosen your corset under the wisteria and blame the heat. You can pause, barefoot on the grass, just for a second, and imagine what it might be like if no one ever rang the dressing bell again. As the sun dips low over the hills, or if you're in London, disappears entirely behind a wall of coal smoke and carriage dust, the Edwardian day begins its slow descent toward evening. But before the garden cools and the maids light the bedroom fires, there's one more essential element that knits family, fortune, and performance into a single embroidered square of daily life. Correspondence. Letters, notes, telegrams, invitations, little paper ambassadors fluttering through the post like butterflies in mourning gloves. Writing letters isn't a casual affair in the Edwardian home. It's a daily ceremony, especially for the lady of the house, who usually sets aside a proper portion of her afternoon, often right after tea, while the sun still slants gently through the drawing room windows, for her correspondence hour. She sits at her writing desk, a delicate creation of polished wood and too many tiny drawers, and begins to address the world with the same deliberate elegance she applies to everything else, from lace trimming to luncheon menus. There is stationery, of course. It's not enough to simply write. You must write well and on proper paper. Thick, creamy sheets embossed with your initials or family crest are standard. Envelopes must be matched. The ink a proper black or deep blue. No garish colours, unless you're French or eccentric, or worse, both. Some ladies scent their letters with a discreet touch of perfume. Others press a flower inside, carefully dried and wrapped in wax paper. Every detail speaks. Every flourish whispers, "I am a person of taste, standing exactly where I should in the world." The letters themselves range from polite obligation to barely restrained longing. Invitations to dinner are phrased in the most indirect way possible. We should be most pleased if you would join us for a modest supper on the evening of the 19th, weather and schedules permitting. Condolences are formal and floral. Please accept our most sincere regrets for your recent loss. We think often of your late husband's fondness for trout. And then there are the love letters, carefully coded and layered with metaphors so thick you'd need a pickaxe to find the actual emotion. Men write letters too, of course, but with a bit less flair. The master of the house might sit in his study after a port-laced dinner, scratching out notes to the solicitor, the estate manager, or the editor of the Times if he feels society is drifting too far into chaos. He uses heavier paper, probably ivory-toned and smelling faintly of ink and cigar smoke. His handwriting is large, a bit impatient, and just formal enough to be respectable. He never adds flourishes, he never underlines. One curious footnote. It was considered bad form to write on both sides of the paper unless you were sending a truly long letter. Why? Because it made the page look crowded, and cluttered paper, like cluttered anything, was a sign of disorder. A short letter with a blank back suggested confidence and clarity. A full sheet front and back, slightly desperate, possibly too French. Then there are the telegrams, those jittery little bursts of urgency. Delivered by uniformed boys on bicycles, telegrams carry a weight far beyond their short-clipped words. No one ever receives a telegram without bracing themselves. They're rarely used for casual updates. Instead, they bring births, deaths, train times, and the occasional awkwardly phrased love confession sent across miles of wire with the emotional precision of a drunk pigeon. A typical telegram might read, "Arrive, Tuesday stop, please have room ready. Stop mother with me, stop!" And just like that, you've lost a week of peace and your best guest towels. The cost of each word means messages are brutally concise. Sentiment is boiled down to the barest flavour. Love always is extravagant. Regards is more common. May need bail is sadly not unheard of, especially among certain aristocratic nephews with an affection for Paris. Back to the lady at her desk. She might spend the better part of an hour responding to invitations, thanking someone for a luncheon she secretly hated, or declining a gathering with carefully veiled regret. We find ourselves otherwise engaged that evening could mean anything from "I have a prior obligation" to "I'd rather dine with the cat." The key is to remain gracious while offering absolutely no hint of your real thoughts. Children are sometimes made to write thank you notes as practice for later life. A 6-year-old may be found labouring over "Dear Aunt Lavinia, thank you for the book about birds," while the governess corrects spelling and posture in equal measure. These little notes aren't just cute, they're training. Being properly grateful in writing is as vital as learning to curtsy or butter toast without making a sound, and of course the servants are involved too. Letters must be carried to the nearest postbox, or, in grander homes, given to the footman or coachman to deliver directly. Incoming post is sorted by the butler, placed on silver trays and delivered with morning tea. There's an entire economy of paper movement happening behind the scenes, mostly invisible and yet completely essential. Without it, society would collapse under the weight of unanswered invitations and unattended funerals. There's ongoing scholarly debate about whether all this letter writing served any emotional purpose or was merely social maintenance. Some suggest the ritual allowed people, especially women, a voice and influence they couldn't otherwise express. Others argue it was simply one more performance, words bent into shape like corseted sentences, sent out not to connect but to maintain appearances. Perhaps, again, it was both, a cage made of lovely stationery. As dusk rolls in, letters are sealed with wax, ink blotted, envelopes stacked in neat bundles. The lady rings for the maid. "Please have these sent," she says, gesturing toward the pile that holds a dozen carefully wrapped social negotiations. And off they go, notes to old friends, cautious flirts, grudging thank yous, quiet griefs, all folded and vanished into the postbag. And somewhere else, far from the parlour, far from the garden, far from the calligraphy and the etiquette, a young woman in a smaller house opens a letter addressed in perfect handwriting. She reads the words slowly, twice, then 3 times. Her fingers touch the embossed edge, and for just a moment, she feels that she too is part of something larger, something careful and beautiful and maddeningly unreadable. There's a certain hush that settles over an Edwardian household as the final hour draws near. Not just physical quiet, the servants already tiptoeing through their final tasks, the drawing room fires burning down to thoughtful embers, but an emotional stillness too. The performance of the day, polished and presented like a glass dome full of butterflies, is complete, and before the curtain drops entirely, there's one more act to close out this carefully orchestrated life: reflection. You might think this is the part where everyone goes to sleep and the house finally rests, but no. First comes the review, the rehearsal of what has been and what must still be done. For the family, this takes the form of quiet conversation, perhaps between husband and wife in adjoining chairs before the fire, or a solitary figure journaling in a private study, scratching pen to paper under the light of a dimmed lamp. There's something sacred in the way Edwardians hold on to their rituals, even when no one is watching. The lady of the house, now back in her dressing gown with her hair long and brushed to a glossy fan, may spend a few minutes leafing through her diary. Not a diary filled with dreams and confessions, this is no gothic novel heroine's wailing book, but a domestic ledger, equal parts social calendar and log of strategic intentions. She notes that Mrs. Delaney brought her terrible sherry, and that Lady Smothersby's daughter might be getting too close to that barrister with the unfortunate teeth. She adds a mark next to Tuesday. Reminder: luncheon with the vicar's wife, whose conversation is drier than toast left out in February. The master of the house performs his own rituals. Perhaps he smokes one final pipe in the library, puffing thoughtfully at the coals, eyes skimming the front page of the Times. Or maybe he finishes writing to his solicitor, closing the letter with a flourish and sealing it with practiced authority. These moments aren't indulgent. They're part of the scaffolding that holds up his sense of order, of control. In a world that changes slowly but changes all the same, it's comforting to end the day doing something entirely familiar. For the servants, the review of the day happens more by whisper and ritual. The housekeeper checks her list one last time. Parlours dusted, sheets changed, the afternoon tea silver returned to its velvet-lined case. She reviews tomorrow's duties, nods to the footman who locks the side door, and gives the kitchen one final glance before letting it sleep. The butler ensures all the lights are turned down, the liquor cabinet locked, the clock on the mantel wound and ticking correctly like the heart of the house. Quiet, precise, eternal. And then to bed, again. But it's more than just the repetition of sheets and slippers. It's the carrying of memory, of a full day's worth of words, gestures, glances, judgments, and silences. It's the emotional weight that hides beneath every perfectly tied cravat and polished boot. The things that were said, the things that should have been said. The tiny victories and the private defeats. The servant who finally impressed the cook. The child who earned a nod from the governess. The guest who smiled a second too long. Here's your quirky fringe fact for the final lap. In some Edwardian households, particularly among the wealthiest or most eccentrically organised, there was a household record book, kept not just by the housekeeper, but overseen by the lady herself, a running tally of meals, guest behaviour, seasonal illnesses, servant reliability, and even how well the roses performed that year. One entry from a preserved journal reads simply, "Cook's nerves bad again. Dinner tolerable." Another, "Guest list for Tuesday in danger. Mrs. Hammond believes she's funny." And in this cataloguing, there's something deeply human. You get the sense that for all the powdered appearances and corseted lives, Edwardians were keenly aware of time slipping past them, that each day, though pinned into place by etiquette, was still fragile, still worthy of being noted, remembered, occasionally mocked. There's even something almost touching in how they tried to preserve every inch of their days, not for others, but for themselves. A way of saying we were here, and we did things the way we were told, but also a little bit the way we wanted to. There's been ongoing debate among historians, writers, amateur reenactors about the emotional landscape of Edwardian life. Were they truly cold and repressed, or simply well practiced in presenting calm exteriors to survive a world that demanded nothing less? Was there comfort in all the structure, or was it just camouflage for aching hearts and bored minds? Some say the answer depends on class, others argue it depends entirely on personality. Either way, beneath all those hats and calling cards and dance cards, there were real people trying, just like you, to make sense of their place in the world. And this, more than the roast beef or the etiquette manuals or the embroidered handkerchiefs, is what defines daily life in the Edwardian family. The constant low hum of effort. The work of being someone. Not just a person, but a role. Mother, son, maid, master, cousin, governess, guest. And with each role came expectations, lines to say, gestures to perform, and above all the constant awareness that eyes might be watching. But there is beauty in it too, in the ways they honoured the day by preparing for it, documenting it, wrapping it in rituals like paper around a gift. They saw meaning in morning tea, in the ironed newspaper, in a garden path swept before breakfast. And maybe that's the trick. Not that the Edwardians were better at living, but that they were better at noticing. And so, as the lights go out one by one across the many rooms of a sleeping Edwardian house, you lie beneath your heavy blankets, eyes adjusting to the dark, ears tuned to the creak of the beams, the distant tick of the hallway clock. You've played your part, you've observed the rituals, you've survived another day in a world that demands dignity, poise, and precise linen folds. And maybe, in the quiet just before dreams come, you allow yourself one small scandalous thought. That tomorrow, if no one's looking, you might take your tea in the garden without gloves. And so the curtain falls on the Edwardian household, with its silk-covered rituals, carefully timed mealtimes, and invisible armies of workers moving like clock gears behind damask walls. You've walked through the drawing rooms and down the back stairs. You've heard the breakfast gong and felt the oppressive poetry of a well-pressed collar. You've survived afternoon calls, dodged scandalous biscuits, and fallen asleep beneath 5 blankets and 1,000 expectations. The world you've stepped through tonight was stitched together with posture and pageantry, but beneath it all pulsed something universal, the daily effort to belong. Whether you were a lady brushing out your hair by candlelight or a scullery maid scrubbing out a kettle before dawn, you were part of the same great performance, one built on grace, guilt, rules, and the quiet ache for something just a little softer. That's the paradox of Edwardian life. So much gentleness wrapped in so much rigidity. Roses trimmed to unnatural perfection, silver polished until it ceased to sparkle, emotions folded away like winter linen. But still, there were small rebellions, a late-night laugh in the servants' hall, a skipped corset hook, a letter that said far too much between the lines. So as you drift off tonight, think of those quiet hours in the grand houses, fires glowing low, journals closed, boots set out for morning. Imagine the house asleep, with all its layered lives wrapped up tight, not just in sheets and routines, but in centuries of tradition, and the slow, creeping change already pressing at the edges. Tomorrow there'll be tea to pour, shoes to shine, guests to greet, but not yet. For now, just rest. The past will still be here when you wake,